Western Scotland and increasingly Northern Ireland, we're going to see some more persistent rain emerging as the day wears on. For England and Wales, some bright skies, some sunshine and feeling warm in the sunshine, 15 or 16 Celsius for some spots. But as those temperatures rise, the showers will just get more and more lively. Hail and thunder a possibility across central parts of England into East Wales. Then a spell of more persistent rain pushes across Scotland, clearing the Northern Isles during the evening, perhaps turning to wet snow across Shetland, along with a strengthening wind. However, once that's out of the way, the showers are generally decaying elsewhere with some clear spells and, as a result, a colder start to Sunday. I think most places frost-free because of the cloud and a bit of a breeze, but it will feel fresher first thing Sunday. However, the compensation? Brighter skies, plenty of sunshine developing through the morning and early afternoon, and it stays dry through Sunday until later on when more wet weather starts to emerge from the west, and there'll be more rain at times on Monday and Tuesday.
Join me, Patrick Christies, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christies, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, a very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christies here on GB News 3 until 6. Here's what's on the menu this hour. Now, Rishi Sunak, he wanted to stop the boats, but has he stopped the strikes? Pay deals on the table for public sector workers. It looks like there could be a massive breakthrough there, so we'll get stuck into that. However, potentially quite bad news for this guy. That's right, Keir Starmer. Are Labour in recession? It looks as though he's OK for doctors to make millions, but not everyone else. What's up with that? And getting more bizarre news as well. Oxfam are apparently looking to give guidance to staff that the words mum and dad might be offensive. Mother and father, really. I actually went out and about earlier and spoke to a couple of people to see what they made of the whole thing.
It doesn't offend me, no. It's just a bit crazy, really, isn't it? If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, and here's one that's going to get you quite angry, I think. Levi Bellfield, the murderer, is looking to use your money, reportedly, taxpayers' money, to fund a legal bid to allow him to marry a mystery woman in prison. What do you make of that? All of that coming your way and much, much more with me, Patrick Christies, this hour. OK, loads to get stuck into there, ladies and gents. Get those emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, on anything that we spoke about, the strikes, etc. But really, I think, do you think the taxpayer should fund Levi Bellfield's marriage bid? Yep, that's right, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But now it's your headlines with Rory Smith.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. It is understood that striking doctors could meet the Health Secretary to discuss a pay rise this afternoon. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer. Downing Street says the pay deal would cost an additional £4 billion. But chair of the Labour Party, Anna Lees-Dodds, says pay talks should have happened sooner.
Rishi Sunak and his ministers did not sit down and have that proper negotiation on pay for a very, very long time. And it's been estimated that about 140,000 operations and appointments were cancelled because of the impact of that industrial action. And that's even before you take the junior doctors' strike into account that's just started. So, the Conservatives have got to learn from this. They can't make the same mistakes when it comes to the junior doctors.
Meanwhile, the Education Secretary is meeting with unions today for intensive talks over teacher pay, conditions and workload reduction. The unions have agreed not to strike over the next 2 weeks as discussions continue. China's president will hold strategic cooperation talks with President Putin next week. Beijing and Moscow struck a no-limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries have warned Beijing against supplying Moscow with weapons, but China has denied such plans, criticising Western weapon supplies to Ukraine. Police Constable Mary Ellen Bettley-Smith has been found guilty for attacking a former Aston Villa footballer with a taser and a baton. Former striker Dalian Atkinson died after being kicked at least twice in the head by another officer, Benjamin Monk, who's been jailed for 8 years for manslaughter. Miss Bettley-Smith was cleared of assaulting Mr Atkinson after a trial, but the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there was a gross misconduct disciplinary case to answer for her use of force. 3 men accused of murdering footballer Cody Fisher will stand trial in July. The footballer was killed inside a Birmingham nightclub shortly before midnight on Boxing Day last year. 21-year-old Cammy Carpenter, 22-year-old Remy Gordon and 18-year-old Regan Anderson have pleaded not guilty to the charge. Killers with a history of coercive or controlling behaviour towards their victims are to face tougher sentences. A new law will require courts to consider a history of violent acts before convicting murderers. The change follows recommendations made by lawyer Claire Wade in an independent review into domestic homicide sentencing. The government will respond in full to the Wade review this summer. The latest hearing in Prince Harry's libel claim against the Mail on Sunday will take place later today. The Duke of Sussex is suing Associated Newspapers Limited over an article about security arrangements for him and his family when being in the UK. 3 million people have been experiencing driving licence delays since April 2020. That's according to a report by the Public Accounts Committee. Some of those affected have experienced job or income loss and are unable to start or return to work because of the delay. Both the pandemic and using equipment that is not up to date are being blamed for the issue. Passport office workers will strike for 5 weeks starting next month in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. More than 1,000 members of the public and commercial services will walk out from the 3rd of April to the 5th of May across England, Scotland and Wales. The union says the action could have a significant impact on the delivery of passports. The founder of Ann Summers, Jacqueline Gold, has died at the age of 62. In a statement, her family said Jacqueline died yesterday evening after battling stage 4 breast cancer for 7 years. She was made a CBE in 2016 for services to women in business, entrepreneurship and social enterprise. Royal fans will be able to watch the King's coronation on big screens across the UK. Over 30 screens will be erected at famous landmarks, including Cardiff Castle, Belfast City Hall and Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. The government says it will make it easier for everyone to feel part of the historic event taking place on May the 6th. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It is Kate's first time at the parade as the Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now though, back to Patrick.
Yes, I am back at it after a wonderful day at the races yesterday, but lots to get through, so let's get cracking. And there is fresh hope today that the epidemic of strikes that has done so much damage to the economy in the last few months is finally coming to an end. Rishi Sunak wanted to stop the boats. Has he actually stopped the strike? Striking doctors could be meeting the Health Secretary this afternoon, a day after health unions agreed a pay deal that they'll now put to their members. Interesting as well to see on the front pages of a lot of the left-wing press this morning almost urging them to take this deal. And government and education unions have agreed to hold intensive talks on pay and conditions after a series of strikes by teachers in recent months. It comes after, of course, the RMT decided to suspend their action as well. Very shortly, I'm going to go over to Catherine Forster. She's outside the Department for Education. But we've got a range on this today, ladies and gentlemen, and I am quite keen to get your views as ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Make sure that you let me know whether or not you think this is a real win for Rishi. Is it a win for the unions? We're going to delve into more detail right now with Catherine Forster, who is outside the Department for Education for us. Catherine, good stuff. OK, so we're going to come on to the health side of things and come on to the rail side of things. But the teachers' unions, they were supposed to be going on strike and they're not. This is potentially quite a big win for the government, is it not?
Well, it will be. I should say that parents up and down the country, many of them had to take 2 days off work because children were off school yesterday and the day before in large parts of the country. But certainly there are intensive negotiations taking place in the Department for Education just over my shoulder. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, arrived looking very smiley this morning. There seems to be a new spirit of cooperation has broken out. She's previously taken really a very hard line with the teaching unions, but it does sound at the moment like all sides are willing to talk. And the hope, of course, is that this NHS deal that was put forward tomorrow for ambulance workers, nurses, etc., could unlock progress in many other disputes that are taking place between the government and the public sector at the moment.
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting to see what essentially has possibly, from what we can gather anyway, been offered to some of these teachers as well. Gillian Keegan says the government has committed an extra £2 billion in England, taking real-term spending on schools to its highest level in history. Apparently, the government offered most teachers a 3% pay rise in 2023 and 2024, which the NEU, the union, says isn't enough. Most state school teachers in England had reportedly a 5% rise in 2022. They claim that teacher pay has fallen by around 23%, don't they, in real terms since 2010 and 2022. But this actually, I think, Catherine, could be a great thing, a shot in the arm for Rishi Sunak, who, of course, didn't allow anything about public sector pay to be put in Jeremy Hunt's budget that was earlier this week, did he?
Yes, that was very curious, wasn't it? It was noticeable by the omission that there was no mention of money allocated to deal with paying public sector workers more. Now, if Rishi Sunak should succeed in bringing an end to these strikes, that will, of course, be hailed as a victory for him. He's riding fairly high, relatively speaking, at the moment, isn't he? In that the budget hasn't imploded on first contact. The Windsor framework also seems to be going okay. But, of course, there's still a lot of strikes in the offing. These strikes have been going on for many months. They've been hugely disruptive. And Labour's argument, as we heard the Labour Party chairperson Annalisa Dodds earlier, saying to the government, well, what took you so long? Because there's been huge disruption, huge damage in the meantime. If you were going to make these offers, why did you not do this months ago?
Yes, indeed. Look, Catherine, thank you very, very much for delivering that outside the Department for Education. Of course, there is a medical element to this, and look, we all know, of course, that the strikes have crippled our public sector for pretty much, it seems like forever now, doesn't it? But a day after the government and the health unions agreed a new pay offer, the big question is this: will the members actually accept it? And we are witnessing a split at the minute because various different unions have basically said, look, we are dead keen for you to accept this, pretty much. But one union has not. That union is Unite, and here to discuss that, I am joined now by Onay Kassab, who is the National Lead Officer for the Unite Union. Look, thank you very, very much for joining me. Now, as far as I can gather, reportedly anyway, the offer to NHS staff consists of a one-off payment of 2% of their salary, plus a COVID recovery bonus of 4% for the current financial year, and a 5% pay increase for 2023 to 2024. Is that not a great deal, and should your members not accept it?
Well, it'd be up to our members to decide. The reason why we've not recommended it is that the amount for 2022 is unconsolidated. It is a one-off payment that will not help recruit more people into the NHS. There are vacancies of some 133,000 in England alone, and by its nature, that payment will only go to current staff, and it will be a one-off. And then there's the 2023 payment, and that is below the current inflation figure. So that's why we've not been able to recommend it, but we will let our members decide and make the final decision.
Do you sense that the tide is turning? I mean, I've got a copy of the Metro here. It's not typically pro-government. Say yes to end strikes. I've got the I again. I think we could all agree it's not particularly pro-Tory. NHS pay deal signals end to wave of public sector strikes. There's a couple of others as well doing the rounds. Nurses deal at last in the Mirror. Everyone wants this done. Should you not just recommend it to your members and, frankly, people can get back to work and the health of our nation can improve?
Well, leaving aside your assessment of the leanings of those papers, the reality is that there have also been considerable concerns expressed about this. I've listened to a number of phone-ins on radio shows where people are saying that the deal was simply not good enough, taking into account where inflation is, how much our members have lost over the years, and what we believe would be a fair pay increase. So I don't believe that the tide is turned. I still feel that the public support NHS workers getting a decent pay increase. But as I said, ultimately, this will be for our members to decide. I think it's worth pointing out that the government said it would not negotiate. And it said that time and time again. And then it was forced to negotiate.
Well, this is
only through strike action.
But this is it. You've got a really nice opportunity here to allow people undergoing things like chemotherapy or that need transplants or that need an ambulance to actually get the care that they want, because you can bracket this as a win, can't you? And I'm looking at this now, the Royal College of Nursing, GMB, Unison, they apparently back all of this offer. So are you worried that if your union comes out, all right, you're not coming out necessarily against it, you're not recommending it, it does make it look a little bit like you don't care for sick people in this country?
No, absolutely not. Our members made it very clear from the first day of this campaign and the strike action that this was more than about pay, that it was about saving the NHS, that the two are inextricably linked. The harsh reality is this, that the crisis in the NHS hasn't been caused by strike action. the crisis in the NHS has been going on for a very, very long time. Waiting lists, the crisis in the ambulance service, the fact that only 25% of shifts have the allocated number of staff on them is not the fault of strikes. Look, here's another point. During the strike action, we agreed emergency cover. We agreed what are called derogations. And what we found is that in many cases, they're actually better than the minimal services provided by the NHS on non-striking days.
Well, I get that. And a lot of people found that quite hard to get their heads around, because people like me were saying, well, doesn't that just mean that there are already people in the NHS who aren't doing their job properly for quite a lot of money, and they're not necessarily the people that you represent, OK? That's that squishy layer of management that a lot of people at the coalface in the NHS, and I can understand why, but seem very reluctant to criticise the lack of organisation or good organisation, the fact that you can have massive strike action. In some cases, I believe the largest NHS strike action that we've seen in decades, if not ever, and for the service to function basically better than it was before, implies to me that the problem lies within the NHS. And can I just suggest as well, from what I can gather, this is a pay offer, OK, and it's been willing to accept it and stop the strikes. I mean, does that not slightly undermine the idea that everyone was out on the picket lines to save the NHS? They were out to save their own bank balances, weren't they? Because there's not a whopping great big addition to NHS funding in all of this, is there?
No. Well, look, you can't have it both ways. We've taken a reasonable position to suspend the action so that our members can make a decision. And I think that's the right thing to do. As far as the crisis in the NHS is concerned, our view is clear. That's down to decades of underfunding. It's down to schemes like the Private Finance Initiative. It's down to the fact that over the last 5 years, £4.5 billion has been spent on agency fees. So that's the reason for the crisis. That's the reason that our members have been clear. This is about saving the NHS. That's inextricably linked.
But yeah, they've rowed back because they've got more pay.
They won't come. Well, if you don't pay people a living wage, then they're not going to be able to work in the NHS. Don't forget, I think everybody now accepts our NHS workers are drastically underpaid. When hospitals are having to provide food banks for their own staff, that's an appalling situation to be in. And I think it's a credit to those representatives and our members who have said, OK, we will suspend the action and we'll properly consider the employer's offer, the government's offer, and we'll take it to a vote.
Can I ask how you felt on Wednesday when it was budget day? OK, now, there wasn't anything in the budget about you guys, OK, and that must have been infuriating for you. We had, according to some reports, more than 100,000 people marching on Westminster, public sector workers, saying, we need more here, we need more here. And the leader of the Labour Party stood up and asked 6 questions about Gary Lineker and didn't mention you once. How did that make you feel?
Well, look, I think you raised an important point at the start of that, which is about the budget. We were told very, very clearly that there would be extra money put up to resolve the NHS pay issue.
So you don't feel let down? You don't feel a bit let down by Labour?
The question is, where is that money?
You don't feel a little bit let down by Labour?
We are laser focused on winning decent paying conditions for our members.
All right. Look, Onno, thank you. Can I just say I really, really enjoy our chats, and it's great to have you on the show, and thank you for putting yourself forward and coming on. It's always great to talk to you. That's Onno Kassab, there's National Lead Officer at Unite. Look, just to whiz you through, yes, as we were saying there, so it looks as though there is going to be an end to these strikes, which I think we can all agree is a great thing. Can I just pose the wider question as well, which is, look, I know a lot of people really very much on the fence when it comes to Rishi Sunak. We can all look at the polls, and I do think if there was a general election tomorrow, it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that Labour will win that general election. But if these strikes do come to an end and there's a resolution there, and then you look at, we remain sceptical, I think a lot of people do, don't they, about what's going on in the Channel, but there appears to be at least some kind of deal there and a bill in place there. And then you've got AUKUS as well, you've got the defence spending, you've got the Windsor framework. How do you feel about the way Rishi's doing at the minute? Is it all coming up? Rishi, the budget didn't implode as well, which is rather nice, actually. Economic projections doing OK. What do you make of this? Do you think that actually the tide is turning in Rishi Sunak's favour? GB views at gbnews.uk. But this week, the Chancellor scrapped the lifetime pensions allowance, which was £1 million. So Now, high flyers will be able to put aside as much money as they want in their private pension pots without that being taxed. Now, I know a lot of people will be shouting at their TV screens now going, well, this doesn't apply to me. By the way, I am one of them. You know, very unlikely I'll ever have £1 million in my pension. It does seem all right for some. But the way that Jeremy Hunt bracketed this was to help more senior NHS doctors remain in the workforce so they don't retire when their pension pot is going to tip over the 1 million mark. But critics have argued he could have just come up with a tailor-made scheme just specifically for doctors. So why should everybody, as Keir Starmer is saying, why should everybody be allowed to save £1 million, not just doctors? He called it a £1 billion giveaway to the richest. But does he have a point, or does Labour have a massive problem with the rich? Let's talk to Tom McPhail, who's a pensions expert. Tom, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show again. Let's start with this lifetime tax-free allowance being scrapped, because actually there are, it might sound unattainable to me and to a lot of people, there are a lot of people who will benefit, not just doctors, from this lifetime tax-free allowance being scrapped. So do you think it is just a giveaway to the rich?
Hi, Patrick. Well, yes, it is mostly a giveaway to the rich. I think there's some good in there. So generally, I think it's a good thing that he didn't do a special carve-out for doctors, because then we'd have had the air traffic controllers or the head teachers or whoever all coming along saying, well, what about us, right? So it would have created a whole load more problems. So creating a simple solution that says, look, there you go, scrap the lifetime allowance, which I think was a good thing to do, is probably a good outcome. He boosted the annual amount you can put into pensions as well, though, and the two combined essentially means that unless you can get more than £1 million in your pension pot, this is of no relevance to you. So that's fantastic, you know, for the wealthy people. No use to people who are just on ordinary average incomes. It won't affect them. And you know, look, here's the problem: you can have simplicity, or you can have fairness, right? So the government's gone for simplicity. This is a simple solution. It gets the doctors back to work. It actually simplifies the rules a bit. Boom, job done. Labour have looked at this and gone, well, that's not fair. And, you know, both attitudes are right. It depends which end of the telescope you're looking down.
But then it's interesting, isn't it? Because Labour then gets itself into quite a tricky situation of saying which they basically are saying, actually, we value doctors more than we value other people who can earn that amount of money. And I can understand the logic there, because most people who work in finance won't save lives for a living, in a direct sense anyway, that's for sure. So I do get that, but it all gets a little bit messy, doesn't it, if you do that? And I wonder whether or not, actually, this is quite a good thing in terms of as a neat little policy for the Tories to go, well, we are preserving our quotes-unquote base, which might be wealth creators, some would argue. It also allows us to use this thing where we can say, well, we're doing our bit by the doctors. You mentioned another public sector there as well, education, you know, high-flying teachers and heads as well. So there will be quite a few public sector workers. Why do you think it might have been the wrong thing to do to frankly do what Labour want to do, which is just give it to the doctors this break?
Because it creates complexity in the system, and pensions are complicated enough already. If you start creating special carve-outs for the doctors, you will get other people, air traffic controllers, another group. Other people will come on and say, well, what about us? Give us a special exemption. And then in terms of planning, you've got this wrinkle in the rules that says, well, the NHS pension scheme, that's different to every other pension scheme. That makes tax planning more complicated. So I'm kind of glad they haven't done a carve-out for doctors. But the consequence is now it looks like a giveaway bung to the wealthy. Can I just add, there's unfinished business here, because what they've now effectively created is a vehicle that's quite good for inheritance tax planning for wealthy people. They've actually created a set of rules that says, look, put lots of money in your pension and then you can pass it on to your kids without having to pay inheritance tax on it. That's not what pensions are supposed to be for. So I think both the government and Labour need to come back and look at where we've got to with these rules and work out where we go next, because it looks like unfinished business.
I get that. Just one more quick one with you, if that's all right, because I think inheritance tax, for someone who's worked their entire lives and saved their entire lives and put money away for their kids, why shouldn't they be allowed to give them as much of that money? They've paid tax all their lives, and if they've managed to save up a load of money, they will have been paying more tax than most people throughout the course of their lives. You know, shouldn't a government actually go, all right, well done you, thanks a lot, hand that down to your kids?
Broadly, I agree with you. It's about proportion, though. Should you be able to give all of it to your kids without paying any tax? I mean, bear in mind, you're dead at this point. You don't need the money anymore. It's a windfall for your kids. So maybe you can make a case for the government should take a bit of that money. And you know, we can debate whether it's all or none or some. What worries me about what they've done with the pensions is say we've got this special rule that says you can build money in your pension pot and we don't take inheritance tax out of that. And that looks a bit odd.
OK, look, Tom, thank you very, very much. Tom McPhail there, always great to chat to on this minefield of pensions and finance, etc. He is a pensions expert. Now, what do you make of this? Because we're going to be talking about this a bit later on in the show as well and broaden it out, because to me it looked a bit like Labour were on the back foot with this, and now they've come out quite predictably and said, well, look, Tories are just helping the rich, aren't they? Is that not cancelled out slightly by the Conservatives going, well, anyone with kids pretty much can get 30 hours free childcare, young kids, etc.? So I think that's maybe a bit of a balancing act there. What do you make of it all? I just can't help but wonder, when you look at it in the round, as the topics that we've just spoken about there, if Rishi Sunak has managed to stop the strikes, he does manage to do something that stops at least most of the boats, and then we've got the Windsor Framework and we've got the Defence Pact, etc. I'm just wondering whether or not you think that the tide is turning for Rishi. Get in touch on that, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But I've got loads more coming your way. It's not just the boring financial stuff, because Prince Harry is in the news today. When is he not in the news? But this time, he's suing a newspaper group. I'll have the latest on that. I'm also going to be talking about Oxfam as well, because they are basically saying to their employees, do you mind not using the terms mum and dad because that's offensive? Have a day off. And Levi Bellfield as well, the murderer. He wants you, reportedly, to pay for his legal costs so he can get married to a mystery woman. I mean, who would want to marry him? But there we go. I'm Patrick Christies and this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to bring you some big breaking news, actually. It's just dropped in the last few moments. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin accusing him of being responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine. Just going to read that once more. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of being responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly denied accusations that its forces have committed atrocities during its one-year invasion of Ukraine. The ICC issued the warrant for Putin's arrest on suspicion of unlawful deportation of children and unlawful transfer of people from the territory of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. We will bring you more detail on that very, very shortly. I will have a guest on it, and we can unpack exactly what this means for Putin, for Russia and the world, no doubt. So there we go. That was the breaking news. In other news now, though, Prince Harry's libel case against the publishers of the Mail on Sunday returned to court today. Lawyers for the Duke of Sussex asked the court to make a ruling in his favour without the need for a trial. Hardly a shock, is it? The case relates to an article about Harry's security arrangements. Let's join our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's outside the Royal Courts of Justice in central London, and Paul can bring us bang up to date with whatever the latest is. Paul, thank you. What's going on?
Yeah, this is quite a technical hearing, so you'll forgive me if I just start with a little bit of background, Patrick, which is that in 2020, the Home Office made the decision to scale back Harry's security when both he and his family come to the UK. So Prince Harry decided to put in a judicial review of that decision. Now, this pre-trial libel hearing is about the coverage of that judicial process. Notably, an article in the Daily Mail, both the paper and the website, in February last year. And I'll read you the headline because it kind of encapsulates the whole article. How Prince Harry tried to keep his legal fight with the government over police bodyguards a secret. And then he goes on to say, then just minutes after the story broke, his PR machine tried to put a positive spin on the dispute. Now, Prince Harry, very unhappy with that article. He felt it was defamatory. There was a pre-trial hearing last summer, and a judge ruled the article was defamatory, and it gave readers the impression that Prince Harry was intentionally trying to mislead and confuse. However, the judge rejected the claim by Prince Harry that the article accused Prince Harry of lying. Now, these two sides, both Associated Newspapers who own the Daily Mail and Prince Harry, they had until January the 20th to try and sort it out between themselves without it going to trial. They couldn't. It's gone to another pre-trial hearing today, where we've heard from Prince Harry's lawyer, Justin Rushbrook, who's essentially told the judge that he wants to dismiss Associated Newspapers' defence, just strike it out completely, in which case Prince Harry wins, or give a summary judgment in Prince Harry's favour. In either case, that would mean there is no need for a trial. Associated Newspapers, their legal team have been laying out their defence, and essentially there are two defences. A, it was an honestly held opinion, they're saying, and B, there's no damage to Prince Harry anyway. The Mail on Sunday twisted information they received, and so cannot use the defence of honest opinion, according to Prince Harry's lawyer, Justin Rushbrook. But Associated Newspapers' legal team have said that the article in question was not materially misleading. Now, we're still waiting for some sort of judgment here. It could go to trial, it may not go to trial, it depends what the judge says. He could make a decision today, or he could then go away and think about it and issue his judgment in due course. But it's one of a number of libel cases that are being brought by Prince Harry. There's another one against Associated Newspapers and the Mirror Group, which owns the Daily Mirror, and against News Group newspapers, who own the Sun and used to own the now defunct News of the World. All of those regard obtaining private information illegally, most notably phone hacking. So Prince Harry will be not himself personally, although we are expecting him possibly to appear at the end of this month in court. But Prince Harry and certainly his legal team are going to spend a lot of time in this court having a battle with various parts of the British print press.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's kind of popcorn time eventually. It will be anyway. Paul, thank you very much. Paul Hawkins there, who's outside the Royal Courts of Justice in central London for us, bringing you up to date on Prince versus the press, which is what we're bracketing it as here. Look, loads more to come between now and 4 o'clock. We will debate the rights and wrongs of, I mean, you're not going to believe this if you haven't heard about it already, Oxfam's inclusive language guide that tells its staff to avoid words like mother, father, headquarters. It wants to spell women, apparently, with an X instead of an E. So it's Wimson, anyway. And yes, in other news as well, a serial killer, Levi Bellfield, reportedly tries to use legal aid, so that would be your money, taxpayers' money, to fight a ruling that stops him marrying his mysterious girlfriend. I will ask, What on earth makes a woman fall in love with a convicted murderer? But first, it is time for your latest headlines with Rory Smith.
Good afternoon, I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. Breaking news just in the past few moments. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of war crimes against Ukraine. The ICC issued the warrant on suspicion of unlawful deportation of children and unlawful transfer of people from the territory of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Moscow has denied the accusations. We will bring you more on this as we get it. It is understood that striking doctors could meet the Health Secretary to discuss a pay rise this afternoon. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will now vote on whether to accept a new pay offer, which includes a 5% pay rise from April. But Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, says pay talks should have happened sooner.
Rishi Sunak and his ministers did not sit down and have that proper negotiation on pay for a very, very long time. And it's been estimated that about 140,000 operations and appointments were cancelled because of the impact of that industrial action. And that's even before you take the junior doctors' strike into account that's just started. So, the Conservatives have got to learn from this. They can't make the same mistakes when it comes to the junior doctors.
Meanwhile, the Education Secretary will meet with unions today as part of intensive talks over teacher pay, conditions and workload reduction. The unions have agreed not to strike over the next 2 weeks as discussions continue. A coroner's inquest into a car crash near St Mellons in South Wales has found that 3 victims were declared dead at the scene. Raphael Jean, Eve Smith and Darcy Ross died in the collision on the A48 at the beginning of the month. The 2 other people, Sophie Russon and Shane Loughlin, were badly injured and remain in a hospital in Cardiff. Gwent Police and South Wales Police are being questioned after it took 46 hours to discover the crash. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now, back to Patrick.
Right, yes, OK. So, look, I've got loads coming your way, but I wanted to touch on this as well. This was a case, and it continues to be a case, that is gripping the nation because of just how shocking it is. The trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel has continued today. Olivia was shot dead in her home in Liverpool last August. Thomas Cashman is charged with her murder, but denies the charges. We're going to go now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' North West reporter, Sophie Reaper. Sophie, thank you very much. What's the latest from today, then, please?
Well, today is day 10 of the trial. Of course, you mentioned there the 34-year-old has been charged with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, but also the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the wounding with intent of Olivia's mother, Cheryl, and 2 counts of possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. But as you say, he denies all of those charges. Now, today, court began with an expert image analyst in the witness box. That was Tessa Macklem. She continued to give evidence in the form of a clothing comparison report. So the jury was shown images agreed to be Thomas Cashman as Ms Macklem compared features of the tracksuit bottoms he was wearing to some clothing she had been supplied with. In one instance, she told the court it was her view that it was much more probable that the clothing was the same. Prosecutor David McLaughlin, KC, then asked her if there were any distinctions whatsoever between the footage she had seen and the clothing she had been provided with. She told him no. The defence then began their questions, instead focusing on the tracksuit jacket as opposed to the tracksuit bottoms. Mr Cooper of the defence asked Ms Macklem about her comparisons, her methodology, and even asking her if she would agree that in some of the images, the jacket that was worn by the potential gunman was different. She refuted this, telling the court that just because some features may have been missing, that could be to do with the picture quality or the angle that it was taken. She said, "I couldn't apply a negative to prove a positive." Now, court has concluded here in Manchester for the day. We're expecting it to resume once more on Monday morning, where it's expected the prosecution will once again resume their case.
Yeah, look, Sophie, thank you very, very much. There's Sophie Reaper there outside Manchester Crown Court, bringing you up to date with the Olivia Pratt-Korbel case. Now, OK, a reminder for you of that big news that broke just a few moments ago. We'll get stuck into this shortly, but the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of being responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine. I'm going to bring you the reaction to that very shortly, delve down to what that really means for Putin, I think, really, and the world as well. And get this, the British public gives hundreds of millions of pounds to Oxfam, that charity, every single year. But the charity has now come out and said that English is the language of a colonising nation. So English is the language of a colonising nation. They want to change various things and certainly are advising their employees to do so. Mother and father is now deemed to be quite offensive, supposedly, amongst other words as well. I've been getting the views of the great British public.
It doesn't offend me, no. It's just a bit crazy, really, isn't it? If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yes, OK, so we'll have much more on that, and certainly as well you're going to enjoy some of the views that I managed to glean out of people on the street earlier on. Look, stay tuned, I've got all that coming your way and much, much more. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Oh, yes, and you will not believe what Levi Bellfield, the murderer, wants you to pay for. Stay tuned.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, we brought you some big breaking news earlier on, didn't we? Vladimir Putin essentially has received an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. I believe we've got a clip to play for you now of what was said at the ICC.
Today, 17th of March 2023, the International Criminal Court has issued 2 warrants of arrest in the Ukraine situation. For Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and for Maria Lvova-Belova, Commissioner of the Russian President for Children's Rights, for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation. It is forbidden by international law for occupied powers to transfer civilians from the territory they live in to other territories. Children enjoy special protection under the Geneva Convention. The contents of the warrants are secret in order to protect victims. The ICC attaches great importance to the protection of victims, especially children. Nevertheless, the judges of the chamber dealing with this case decided to make the existence of the warrants public in the interest of justice and to prevent the commission of future crimes. This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
Yes, OK, all right. So that was the words there from Piotr Hosmansky, who's the ICC's president judge, and it's in relation to that breaking news, which we will get more detail on as to exactly what this really means for Putin going forward, about the ICC issuing an international arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin in relation to actions taken during the war in Ukraine. So there we go. I'm just going to move on now, though, and talk about an issue that, well, actually has got a lot of you talking, and I can understand why, because Oxfam has been criticised for issuing an inclusive language guide telling staff to avoid using words like mother and father. So this 92-page document also says that English is the language of a colonising nation. Oxfam, I mean, imagine what on earth will they do about Portuguese and Spanish and French and Dutch? Arabic. Anyway, Oxfam has posted a video on Twitter that says, the charity is for you, me, him, her, they, them. When we include everyone, we can overcome poverty. Yes, indeed. Well, if you're listening on radio, I can tell you that the video has all the colours of the rainbow behind it as well. Naturally, it would, of course, be very weird if it didn't. And it's even got some more colours that aren't in the rainbow, just for good measure. Oxfam says it's just a guideline and it's not intended as a prescriptive document. But, as you might expect, it has been widely mocked. The front page of today's Daily Mail says it's beyond parody. But what does the great British public think about it? I went out earlier to find out. Mother and father offensive?
No.
What? Why not?
Because they define particular roles and they're sex-based. No.
Why not?
Because that's, I mean...
Are you just a bit exasperated by all of this rubbish?
No. It doesn't offend me, no. It's just a bit crazy, really, isn't it? If it's not broken, don't fix it.
They also want to do, instead of using women plural, they want it to be with an X instead of the E.
Okay, so we're Max. We're Max. Is that how it's pronounced?
Just try again.
We're Max.
Son.
No, sorry.
Not for you, no. Yeah, it's laughable, isn't it? So that's what the public have got to say about Oxfam's guide. But for more on this, I am joined now by Emma Webb, who is the director of the Common Sense Society, and Iman Ayton, who is an activist and organiser of Black Lives Matter protests. Great stuff. Look, OK, well, let's deal with first things first then, Iman. I'll throw it over to you. I mean, overall here, what they're saying is that they think that English is the language of a colonising nation. Presumably, they just want to cancel language from... what, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch and various different Arab nations as well, do they?
See, Patrick, I actually agree with you, and isn't that interesting? And that's how I'm starting.
Right, we can all go home, everyone. Fantastic stuff.
This conversation with agreeing with you. I'm actually in shock, but we won't repeat this, hopefully. So, for me personally, as we know, English is the language of a colonising or part of the colonial language. As we know, the reason why is because there are many other countries, which include, as you said, France, Spain, Germany, Portugal, Italy, that colonised Africa. So if we have a problem with England and English language as colonial language, then we have to have a problem with the Portuguese, who actually started back in the 1500s, and we have to have a problem with Italy, Spain, etc. So I agree with you. I'll leave it at that.
Right, we're off to an absolute flyer here. Although, Emma, I could see you shaking your head slightly at just even the notion that English is the language of a colonising society. What's going on there for you?
Well, I'm finding it hard not to laugh just looking at the specifics of what this guide is actually recommending. The CEO earlier today said that he wants to bring that in order to solve poverty, you have to bring people with you. And it seems that the only people that this is actually inclusive of are, well, certainly not the donors and certainly not the beneficiaries. One of the things that they suggest is not using the acronym BAME or BME, Black and Ethnic or Minority Ethnic, but and instead to use people of colour. And the reason they suggest that is because they said that Black and ethnic minority, that it others, and it basically makes it out that white is normal, but actually surely people of colour also lumps people together in the same way. One of the things that they've suggested is not using the term sanitary products, but as we know that issues to do with what's referred to as period poverty in Africa is a really serious issue. And the idea that this is not to do with hygiene in any way, that to say so would be offensive, is surely to the detriment of the beneficiaries. So actually, I just think that this is imposing a very academic form of language. I mean, they refer to things like coloniality. That is just, it is imposing a form of language on all of the people who work for Oxfam worldwide. I don't see that this is, is doing anything to actually be inclusive. I think they've spent a lot of money on this, and those donations could have been used to actually help people.
Well, this is a cracking point, actually. And Iman, I'll throw it over to you. Can I focus a little bit now on the old mother and father stuff? Because apparently they want to replace that with parent, and women, I believe, is going to be with an X instead of the E. So I don't even know how you would pronounce that. I did get some fair members of the public to give it a red-hot crack earlier on with limited success, it must be said. But the idea of turning against mother and father, like those are offensive terms, is it offensive?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, let me just touch on something that Emma pointed out. So in terms of the term BAME, it was actually recommendation 9 in the Race Ethnic Disparities Commission, launched in 2021. It was one of the recommendations. So it was a recommendation for the UK was to scrap the term BAME because it basically puts black and brown people into a homogenous box. I also agree with you in terms of the term people of colour, but this is why we have to be accurate about these terms, because Oxfam works around the world and ethnic minorities isn't accurate. We are actually the global majority, hence why Westminster has actually adopted that term. So BAME is inaccurate. Global majority would actually be far more accurate. So let me just point that out. In terms of sanitary and the other 2 points that you made later on, I actually agree with. Now, to go back to mother and father. Yes. Unfortunately, I agree with you. So, in terms of an inclusive mindset, we have to be inclusive. And no, don't do that, Patrick. In terms of an inclusive mindset, we have to focus on the fact that Oxfam works around the world. And so when we remove the term mother and father, again, a slight
mic issue. Sorry, Iman, we've got to stay where you are, We've got a slight mic issue, which is, it's almost like they won't allow us to agree, isn't it, on national television? But I'll go back to you. Emma, I'll throw it your way, because when I look at some of the kind of work or lack of that Oxfam did in Haiti, for example, I am amazed that they've decided now to think that it's the best thing for everybody to say that, mother and father is bad, or that they're going to add a few acronyms or whatever it is to the LGBTQ plus IA, etc. Should they just focus on what they're supposed to be doing, which is actually looking after the world's most poverty-stricken and vulnerable, which, if I've got to be honest with you, it does not appear to me that they've been doing in recent years that much.
Yeah, I think a lot of donors, following previous...
OK, we've got sound issues with both of you, which is rather unfortunate because this was shaping up to be a fantastic discussion, but them's the breaks, unfortunately. So there we go. Look, sorry about this. Hopefully someone is beavering away behind the scenes to get this fixed, but there we go. Right, that was Emma Webb, who was the director of the Common Sense Society, and Iman Ayton, who is an activist and organiser of the Black Lives Matter protest. We will be returning to that discussion a little bit later on. An Oxfam spokesperson has said this: we are proud of using inclusive language. We won't succeed in tackling poverty by excluding marginalised groups. This guide is not prescriptive. It is intended to help authors communicate with the diverse range of people with which we work. We are disappointed that some people have decided to misrepresent the advice offered in the guide, which clearly states that authors should respect the desires of those who want to be described as mother or father. There we go. Right, now, moving on. Another big story, this. Should murderers be able to marry people in prison? Simple answer, in my view, no. Well, Levi Bellfield, who's currently serving 2 whole life sentences for the murders of 2 women and 13-year-old Millie Dowler, seems to think that he should. He's reportedly made a bid for legal aid, so he wants the taxpayer to pay so that he can get married to a mystery woman. But let's get the latest on this from a psychologist and true crime TV presenter, Emma Kenny. Emma, I'm keen to get the rationale as to why any woman alive would want to marry this guy.
Well, it's either a sexual fetish. There is a particular paraphilia where somebody wants to be involved romantically with an individual who's done horrendous things like kill children. But the other side of it is, I guess, women with deep insecurities who potentially have had awful relationships in the past, and they like the idea of somebody basically being infamous but also locked up so that they can't essentially stray. That could be another reason. Personally, I think one of the things that Raab has said that actually ironically makes sense, because I don't always agree with their positions in the government, but certainly he's saying maybe we need to also think about the safeguarding of this individual who thinks it's a good idea to place her life, so to speak, for the rest of her life in matrimony with this heinous murderer. So I think that the psychology of the woman is one that states we need to protect her because she's clearly not thinking in a very linear or logical way.
I mean, this guy's never going to get out of prison, so in terms of the actual physical damage that he could do to her, maybe not. But this is not a particularly uncommon thing, and I've always been mystified by this. And you think that maybe it is a bit of a sexual fetish for some women who... What do they get off on, though?
Well, the idea of danger, the idea of being involved with somebody who's done something very, very dark, the fact that they have some particular predilections that aren't necessarily in a positive way, they have malevolence within them. They're all things that can mark it. I mean, I think about Ian Watkins regarding the Lost Prophets. I did a thing on him and got death threats off fans who just thought he was wonderful in spite of the fact what he was doing to children and babies. So you do see that. But for me, this again, and it's more and more creeping into our society. And I used to work with young offenders, so believe me, I know that a lot of young offenders and offenders are victims, right? We don't like to talk about it, but they are. But Bellfield's not a victim. Bellfield actually had a very supportive family. And let me tell you, this man is probably likely guilty of killing other women as well. And the idea that his human rights usurp the human rights of the victims' families is just blindsidingly stupid. I'm getting exhausted with this non-common sense approach. There's money to be made by the solicitors, so of course they're going to push his narrative. He's in prison for life. He shouldn't be given the option to get married to somebody on the outside.
Look, Emma, thank you very, very much. Emma Kenny there, who is psychologist and true crime TV presenter, just filling you in. And as Emma was alluding to there, we're going to be talking about later on about why on earth the taxpayer should be paying for his legal fight. Anyway, I'm asking today, is it time for striking NHS staff, teachers and railway employees to just get back to work? I will also hear from a Ukrainian MP on that big breaking news that the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. What does all of this really mean? I'm Patrick Christies and this is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock and it's me, Patrick Christies, on GB News. Loads to go out this hour, including the big breaking news that we just brought you a few moments ago. Putin has been issued with an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court. We're going to drill down into what all of this really means. It's obviously in relation to what's been going on in Ukraine. But in other news, closer to home, yes, get back to work. That appears to be the message from a lot of people today. It could well be that an end to strike action is in sight. Rishi Sunak wanted to stop the boats. Has he now stopped the strikes? And it could well be bad news for this guy, Keir Starmer. Yes, because are Labour now in recession? They appear to be on the back foot, and I'm going to be talking about whether or not the wind has been taken out of Starmer's sails. But you need a daily dose of culture wars nonsense as well. Oxfam, they're back at it, aren't they? Apparently, they essentially want to cancel the words mum and dad from staff. Oxfam would dispute this, but they're certainly advising members of their staff to not use words like mother and father in case it's offensive. And they've called English the language of colonial oppression. Oh no, bad for us. Anyway, right, moving on. OK, we're also going to be talking as well about Levi Bellfield. That's right, because Levi Bellfield is wanting to use taxpayers' money to fund his legal aid bid so that he can get married to a mystery woman. I mean, just you think you couldn't make this up anymore. Anyway, all of that coming your way and much, much more. Stay tuned. Yes, loads to go out. I'll take emails on literally anything today, ladies and gents. GBviews at gbnews.uk. The Oxfam mum and dad thing, do you think they're going too far? Is English really the language of colonial oppression? GBviews at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon. 2 minutes past 4. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against the Russian president. It's accusing Vladimir Putin of war crimes against Ukraine, including the unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. Moscow has denied the accusations, calling the arrest warrant meaningless. But the ICC president says the allegations are credible.
This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
Meanwhile, China's president will hold strategic cooperation talks with President Putin next week. Beijing and Moscow struck a no-limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries have warned Beijing against supplying Moscow with weapons, but China has denied such plans, criticising Western weapon supplies to Ukraine. And the US president has thanked the Taoiseach for standing together with his country against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joe Biden has met Leo Varadkar in the White House for the traditional St. Patrick's meeting between the two leaders. Speaking from Washington, Mr. Biden says they had a lot to talk about around deepening economic ties between the US and Ireland. The Taoiseach praised the president's support of Ireland's position on Brexit, saying the new Windsor framework will be important for British, Irish and European nations. Now it's understood that striking doctors could meet the Health Secretary to discuss a pay rise this afternoon. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer. Downing Street says the pay deal would cost an additional £4 billion. But Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodd, says pay talks should have happened sooner.
Rishi Sunak and his ministers did not sit down and have that proper negotiation on pay for a very, very long time. And it's been estimated that about 140,000 operations and appointments were cancelled because of the impact of that industrial action. And that's even before you take the junior doctors' strike into account that's just started. So, the Conservatives have got to learn from this. They can't make the same mistakes when it comes to the junior doctors.
Meanwhile, the Education Secretary is meeting with unions today for intensive talks over teacher pay, conditions and workload reduction. The unions have agreed not to strike over the next 2 weeks as discussions continue. Police Constable Mary Ellen Betley-Smith will keep her job. That's despite being found guilty for attacking a former Aston Villa football player with a taser and a baton. Former striker Dalian Atkinson died after being kicked at least twice in the head by another officer, Benjamin Monk, who's been jailed for 8 years for manslaughter. Ms Betley-Smith was cleared of assaulting Mr Atkinson after a trial, but the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there was a gross misconduct disciplinary case to answer for. 3 million people have been experiencing driving licence delays since April 2020, according to a report by the Public Accounts Committee. Some of those affected have experienced job or income loss and are unable to start or return to work because of the delay. Both the pandemic and using equipment that's not up to date are being blamed for the issue. Passport office workers will strike for 5 weeks starting next month in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. More than 1,000 members of the public and commercial services will walk out from the 3rd of April to the 5th of May right across England, Scotland and Wales. The union says the action could have a significant impact on the delivery of passports. The founder of Ann Summers, Jacqueline Gold, has died at the age of 62. In a statement, her family said Jacqueline died yesterday evening after battling stage 4 breast cancer for 7 years. She was made a CBE in 2016 for services to women in business, entrepreneurship and social enterprise. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day today with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It's Kate's first time at the parade as Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
All right, well, we love a little bit of big breaking news, don't we? And we've got some today because the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. However, Russia has said that the arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court in The Hague was meaningless. The decisions of the International Criminal Court have no meaning for our country, including from a legal point of view. A Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, said in her Telegram channel. To discuss this development, I am joined now by Ukrainian MP Andriy Osadchuk. Thank you very much, Andriy. Great to have you on the show. Look, what does all of this really mean? Because it appears to, from what I can gather so far anyway, that it's about the illegal transportation of Ukrainian citizens, many of whom are children, into Russia. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. First of all, it means that we are on the right path. During all last year, we were repeating here from Kyiv that the main target of Ukraine and our allies on the West, not just to defeat Russians on Ukrainian soil and to liberate Ukrainian territory, but the biggest target is not to let it happen again, this nightmare in Europe. And the only way to do that is to punish anyone who committed war crimes in Ukraine. Due to that, we did huge job with our allies, with International Criminal Court, with other institutions to start and to conduct all these procedures which may bring us to justice. I was speaking to International Criminal Court last November. Yeah, I was in Hague in November, and we spent a lot of time discussing different options. And one of the main of International Criminal Court was about Ukrainian children as a form of genocide, which in fact never happened before in the practice of International Criminal Court, but it was definitely a case for Ukraine. So meaning that all last year, the International Criminal Court, together with Ukrainian General Prosecutor Office, was studying this issue. And today it is a confirmation that they've got enough proofs that this type of crime had been happened.
Look, Andre, can I get you to just clarify something for me there? So, from what I'm reading here, reasonable grounds to believe that each suspect, this is Putin and his Children's Rights Commissioner, which I'm presuming is an ironic title, says they had reasonable grounds to believe that each suspect bears responsibility for the war crime of unlawful deportation of population and that of unlawful transfer of population from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation in prejudice of Ukrainian children. And you mentioned the word genocide, I believe, there, did you? Just link those two things for me. Do you think that, what, they're exterminating people, or what's going on?
I was heard from International Criminal Court before that they interpret the intended allocation or kidnapping of Ukrainian children as a well-prepared strategy of Russian Federation to change the national landscape on Ukrainian territories. In fact, by doing this, they want to replace native Ukrainian population with Russian population, what, by the way, they was doing for the last more than 100 years. But it was never done before on such an absolutely inhuman and brutal format as kidnapping, in fact, of Ukrainian kids in thousands. We know about thousands of cases of Ukrainian kids forcibly deported from Ukraine to the territory of Russian Federation. Just few cases we were able to investigate and to bring kids back home. So meaning that it is mass activity of Russian Federation. And again, now it's not my theory, it's not my dreams, it's a conclusion of International Criminal Court, which found enough proofs to issue the arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and others.
Yeah, exactly. And some more detail that I'm just getting right now as well is that the Russian leadership has been, I'm quoting, a completely overt about taking Ukrainian children to Russia, placing them in camps or putting them up for adoption by Russian families. So what you're talking about there is the replacement of a Ukrainian population with a Russian population and moving them to Russia in order to do so. Look, Putin has said that this ruling is meaningless. I'm going to hear shortly from an expert in this kind of thing. But with absolute respect, is this quite meaningless? Because no one's going to go and arrest Putin, are they?
Justice is a long and difficult way. And it is not some routine public organization which did the announcement today. We're talking about International Criminal Court. We know that for the last month, we have a consensus among NATO leaders and European Union leaders that shall be brought to accountability through tribunal. It will happen. So as I said from the very beginning of our interview, that is that only that we are on the right path. Definitely it will take months and probably years. But believe me, the history of international justice is saying that usually it takes a long time to bring people like Putin to accountability. But he's not the first and he is not the last. So we had a lot of good examples during last 20, 30 years when dictators were brought to accountability. So that's why I don't have any doubt that Putin earlier or later will be sitting in prison.
OK, Andrei, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming on the show and explaining what you know about this situation and what could happen going forward. It is a significant development, this, as Ukrainian MP Andrei Osadchuk there. Now, he is reacting to what you can see on your screens there, which is the breaking news, Putin arrest warrant. So the International Criminal Court has basically said we want to arrest Vladimir Putin, and that is based around war crimes which centre around removing children, Ukrainian children, from Ukraine, so Russian-occupied territories, and taking them to Russia, either putting them in camps or up for adoption by Russian families. And clearly there, the implication is that that's with a view of replacing the Ukrainian population with Russians, or certainly we can all gather what probably would be the knock-on effect there. I don't need to say it at this time of day on national television. But with me now is Major General Chip Chapman, who's former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, who has spoken at the ICC in the past. Now, I'm going to just pick up with you where I left off with Andrei, the Ukrainian MP, if that's all right, and just ask, what meaning does this have? You know, it is a strong statement, but actually, Vladimir Putin is not going to see justice for this, is he? Who's going to arrest him?
Well, he won't be arrested in the short term in the same way that, for example, there are arrest warrants out in the UK for Petrov and Bosharov for the Skripal killing. But it shows clear intent, and that's the first thing to say. And the reasonable grounds means that there's something for the future there. Now, in terms of what genocide means, if they're going to play that line, that first came into the English language in 1944, and it is the intent to destroy in whole or part a racial, ethnic, national or religious group. So in terms of taking the people away and doing that potentially en masse, it could meet that remit. Now, the real key thing here is, of course, the ICC don't have any jurisdiction in Russia, and it's not signed up to that. But the ICC does make a request for surrender and arrest. So it may, for example, caveat Putin joining in the short term. But in the longer term, war is really two parts. It's both a physical part and a psychological part. And it puts this seed of doubt in the Russian elite and maybe the Russian people and the Russian military that people are going to come after us. And therefore, the sort of fear of followership does sort of come into play here. And that may start to erode the Russian regime. So it does have significance from that part of view, because we know that the Russians have been guilty of moral injury, particularly at Bucha and Irpin, for example.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because there is another person that this ICC ruling applies to, and it's Maria Alexeyeva Lvova-Belova, OK, who is apparently the Children's Rights Commissioner in Russia. So there we go. And I wonder whether or not the wider connotations here would be, as you were alluding to, anyone who is in Putin's government who goes along with what Putin is doing in Ukraine could find themselves the wrong side of an international arrest warrant and facing what one would imagine would be a hell of a long time, if not life, in prison for war crimes, including, if this is true, the genocide against kids, which is a pretty strong deterrent, one would have thought.
Yeah, and one of the things about this, again, is you need to find a vulnerable flank and exploit it. And that's really what they've done. Now, it's not an aim at the moment of the West to have regime change in Russia. But if the regime were to change, then Putin could conceivably give an op. And that's where you get this chink in the armor of the Russians to do this. And that's exactly the same reason, for example, that Mladic and Milosevic and the Yugoslavia were actually given up in the War Crimes Commission and actually put in prison.
But, and just hear me out on this now, does this actually potentially make things a little bit more dangerous, just purely because Putin would now know that even if he had any intention of giving up, which I don't think he really did, but if he did have any intention of giving up or not remaining in office until the day he dies, that if he does step aside, the person who comes after him could, you know, offer him up as some kind of sacrificial lamb, as it were, and then he finds himself spending the rest of his days in a prison somewhere near The Hague. I mean, is there any chance that this could be spun as making the situation more volatile or dangerous?
I don't think so. I think it is that chink in the armour. The great man theory of international relations is very rarely proven. Putin won't be there forever. Leaders do change. Now, that doesn't mean, he might be there to his death because he's still, at the moment, going to be in power until 2036, unless he's de-elected next year when there is supposed to be a Russian election. I don't think it makes it worse. I do think it puts that sort of chink of what's going to happen to us in the future. So from that perspective, it is morally right, and it may be a clever move. But the ICC doesn't work on clever moves. It operates on justice and what is morally and ethically right.
So, conceivably, if Vladimir Putin ever left Russia or possibly Belarus, they're the two friendly nations that spring to mind, North Korea maybe another one, if he ever left any of those countries and went anywhere else, could officers arrest him? Or how would it practically work? Let's say if Putin decided this war ended tomorrow and Putin decided to go and visit Macron in France, would anything happen to him?
Well, technically it could, but I don't think he's going to visit France tomorrow, so you can put that aside. At the moment, he'd only visit those places where the jurisdiction of the ICC doesn't apply. So that's how he would play it, I think.
OK, all right, look, thank you very, very much. He's Major General Chip Chapman there. He's former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, also spoken at the ICC in the past. We're going to move away from this story now, but just to remind you what it is, because we'll be returning to it, it's an arrest warrant, an international arrest warrant, for Vladimir Putin and indeed his Children's Rights Commissioner over the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. We heard from a Ukrainian MP earlier then who said that this is tantamount to genocide, so the replacement of an ethnic group, a demography there, and trying to replace them with ethnic Russians, as it were. And, yeah, so there we go. That's the latest on that. That's Vladimir Putin's arrest one. We'll bring you more as we get it. There are loads more throughout this show. But to fresh hope that the epidemic of strike action back here at home has done so much damage to the economy in the last few months is finally coming to an end. Government and education unions have agreed to hold intensive talks on the issues which have sparked a series of strikes by teachers in recent months. We're also potentially seeing an end in sight to NHS strikes, to rail strikes. I mean, could this really be a thing? Can we dream of a day of strike action that has been stopped, trains running on time, doctors going to work and teachers actually teaching your kids? For the very latest on this, I'm joined by our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's been across this story for us all day. You have currently parked yourself outside the Department for Education, I believe, Catherine. So what's going on? Is this an end now to strike action that has been plaguing the nation?
Not an end, Patrick, but possibly the beginning of the end, which, let's face it, we'd all be very grateful for. In the last half hour or so, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, has emerged from the Department of Education behind me, where she has been engaged, along with the education unions today, in intensive negotiations. Now, those are due to continue over the weekend. When or if they will bear fruit remains to be seen, but there really has been a change of tone. It's not very long since the education unions were being really heavily critical of the government, and Gillian Keegan herself was saying that she thought basically teachers were paid pretty well considering, and especially taking pensions into account. So the mood music has certainly changed, and of course the deal that is finally on the table now between the NHS and unions and the government does potentially give us a sort of template going forward. Of course, that deal has yet to be accepted, but it does sound hopeful. And the junior doctors' strike, which of course had 3 days of disruption this week, the British Medical Association has now asked to have urgent talks with the Health Secretary. So talks there should be beginning imminently as well, though not as was possibly mooted today. So things are moving, but of course just today we've had it announced that 1,000 passport workers will go on strike between April and May. So no end in sight, but certainly, hopefully, the beginning of the end.
Good stuff, Catherine. Thank you very much. Catherine Forster there, our political reporter outside the Department for Education. Well, this is the story that we're going with today, because is the end in sight for all of these strikes? I think a bit like you was absolutely sick and tired of sitting in this seat every single day, just rattling off a list of who wasn't in work that particular day. But maybe, just maybe, we might be able to talk about something else in the coming weeks. But for now, I am joined by Roger Seifert, who is a Professor of Industrial Relations at Wolverhampton University. Great to have you on the show. Well, this looks like the tide is turning. You know, front pages of a lot of newspapers today who are, I think it's fair to say, maybe traditionally, well, not right-leaning, I will phrase it like that. You know, you've got the Eye here, you've got the Metro, say yes to end the strikes, NHS pay deal signals end to wave of public sector strikes, etc. I mean, this really could be it. The unions are almost being urged now to take a deal that's on the table, aren't they?
Well, as you say, what's happened is the government has moved its original position and put more money on the table, and it was always about money on the table. And they seem to have come up with a formula which isn't perfect, but which may get them over the immediate hurdle, which is that for last year, you get a lump sum rather than anything on your basic. But the key seems to be that the government is offering 5% for the coming year, with a guess that inflation will fall below that. So that could be, as far as the union's concerned, a real-term pay increase, and that would certainly satisfy their members.
This is a little bit like the art of the deal stuff, isn't it? Because I think it gives the unions enough to be able to claim victory, and it gives the government enough to be able to claim victory, because they can say, well, we saw off a bit of a winter of discontent, we didn't cave in there, we've not given them, you know, massive inflation-busting pay rises that the taxpayer's going to have to pay. We didn't even talk about them in the budget, and we had 100,000 people shouting at us from outside the House of Commons. But the unions can say, as you've rightly identified, that potentially they will get a pay rise above whatever that current inflation rate is in a couple of months' time, say. So, actually, is this a bit of a win-win and the country can just move on?
Not really. I think the unions have come out of this better than the government, because the government's original position was there was no more money, but there has been more money. Originally, they said anything over 4.5% was inflationary, but they're offering more. And also, as you remember, they said they would stick with the pay review body recommendations, and they haven't. So in many ways, the government's had to give ground in fact, as well as in its arguments. But the big dispute that's not being resolved is that with the civil servants. And we've seen that with the Passport Office today, but there'll be rolling disputes right across the civil service, and that will cause significant disruption and delay to the business of government.
I mean, just looking at this in the round now, Keir Starmer wasn't a massive fan of these strikes, wasn't on the picket lines like one might have expected previous Labour leaders to be, wasn't forthcoming with what he wanted to do as a result of these strike actions, wasn't putting a number on what he would do to offer these unions. I spoke to a representative of Unite earlier who was clearly not overly impressed with the way that the Labour leader has handled these. When it comes to getting all of this sorted, assuming that people in the NHS, for example, take what we believe is on offer, which is a one-off 2% payment of their salary, plus a COVID recovery bonus of around 4% for the current financial year, plus, as you mentioned, that 5% pay increase from 2023 to 2024, I mean, actually, it could be seen as a win for the Tories here. You know, if he stops the strikes, and Labour haven't exactly dominated this corner of the market, have they?
I don't think it's a win for the government. I mean, what's happened is the government was bitterly divided, and the Prime Minister, to some extent, was finding his feet. I think the solution has come from the Prime Minister himself. He understands that these strikes were quite popular and that they were going on and were doing the government no favours. So he stepped in, overruled his right wing, overruled the departmental heads, and said, you need to settle these because we need stability. We need to be a government that gets things done. So I think what's happened is the Prime Minister has stood up and been counted against his own people, and to some extent, as you say, put Labour in a more difficult position as a result.
And I think, you know, look, obviously, I don't think this is by any means perfect, what's going on here with the strikes, but I think it does put Labour in a tricky situation, because in the last 3.5 weeks, Sunak can come out and say, well, there is at least a migration bill on the table, there's the Windsor framework, there's AUKUS, there's defence spending, there's this, assuming this goes through, and it does start to look a bit, doesn't it, like he's got his hands on the rudder, as it were. But look, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show. That is Industrial Relations Professor at Wolverhampton University. It's Roger Seifert, just reacting to what I think we can all agree is potentially, anyway, very good news. And good news for everybody, because the strikes might stop. So there we go. Yes, the RMT, they don't look like they're going to strike. Doctors and nurses, etc., looks like they're possibly not going to strike as well. Teachers not striking. So the end is possibly in sight. How do you think Rishi Sunak emerges as a result of all of this? But moving on, while William and Kate have spent today celebrating St Patrick's Day, my special day, Prince Harry has been involved in another libel case. That's also something I could know. I'm Patrick Christies, this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Right, welcome back, wonderful people. Now, there's loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. I will ask, do Labour hate the rich? That's after they criticised the decision to let people put more money in their pensions. And should serial killer Levi Bellfield be allowed to use legal aid, that's your money, by the way, taxpayers' money, to fight a ruling that stops him marrying his mysterious girlfriend? Earlier, I touched on why on earth anyone would want to marry Levi Bellfield, but apparently it's, well, some women just do. But first, it's time for your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon. It's 4:32. I am Tatiana Sanchez. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's accused of war crimes against Ukraine, suspected of unlawfully deporting people, including children, to Russia. Moscow, which isn't a member of the ICC, described the move as meaningless. Meanwhile, China's president is due to hold strategic cooperation talks with Vladimir Putin next week. Beijing and Moscow struck a no-limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries have warned Beijing against supplying Moscow with weapons. China has denied such plans, criticising Western weapon supplies to Ukraine. The US president has thanked the Taoiseach for standing together with his country against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joe Biden met Leo Varadkar at the White House for the traditional St. Patrick's Day meeting between the two leaders. Speaking from Washington, Mr. Biden says they had a lot to talk about around deepening economic ties with the US and Ireland. Now, it's understood striking doctors are beginning intensive talks on pay with the Health Secretary today to continue over the weekend. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer. Downing Street says the pay deal would cost an additional £4 billion. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It's Kate's first time at the parade as Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Right, welcome back, everybody. Now, Oxfam has been criticised for issuing an inclusive language guide telling staff to avoid using words mother and father. The 92-page document also says that English is the language of a colonising nation. Oxfam has posted a video on Twitter that says, "This charity is for you, me, him, her, they, them. When we include everyone, we can overcome poverty." Woo! If you're listening on radio, I can tell you the video, of course, is set to a backdrop of all of the colours of the rainbow and some more colours, just to be extra nice. Oxfam says that it's just a guideline and is not intended as a prescriptive document, but as you might expect, it has been widely mocked. The front page of today's Daily Mail says it's beyond parody. With me now is Dr. Rakib Hassan, who is a social policy analyst. Dr. Rakib, thank you very much. Now, this has caused massive criticism, not least for people saying how much money has Oxfam spent on this when it could have been helping out needy kids, although, of course, the children of Haiti might take a different view. But how bizarre is it, do you think, that Oxfam has decided to, well, essentially give advice to its staff that words like mother and father could be offensive?
Well, Patrick, I'm going to make the point that I'm really glad that you raised Haiti, because Oxfam's record in certain areas is far from stellar. In fact, it was actually banned from applying for aid funds in the UK for 3 years after cases of sexual exploitation emerged from its activities in Haiti. And there were also cases of Oxfam workers being suspended for cases of sexual exploitation and bullying in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I find it quite incredible that Oxfam have the time and energy to waste on these kind of modern cultural initiatives, when really I think that it should be advising its staff on the bread and butter of protecting the most vulnerable instead of exploiting them in their overseas activities.
Yeah, indeed. And it's just, I think, yet another virtue signalling statement from someone or a body whose job it is not to do those things, but to actually help people. And when they talk about English being the language of a colonising nation, presumably they're going to be also taking similar policies out in Spain, France, Portugal, much of the Arab world, one would expect?
No, you would think so if that's their logic. I think for me, as we know, Patrick, that there's many organisations in the charitable sector who, in my view, they fail to do the bread and butter when it comes to providing support and assistance for the most vulnerable in British society and in the world generally. But I do think that what I also see in the charitable sector are what I consider to be quite blatant forms of anti-British behaviour. And initiatives which ultimately vilify key elements of British culture, and that includes the English language. So if you see some of these proposals here, I think it's even worse than that. I think that it's deeply misogynistic, and it does amount to the erasure of women, replacing the term expectant mothers with people who become pregnant. I think what you see there is what I see with many charities, is that in trying to be fashionable, they're actually quite responsible for some very deeply misogynistic behaviour.
Yeah, they are. I'm just going to read out this. Avoid using mankind. Instead, use humankind. Reason. Mankind has an inherent association with maleness. Presumably, Oxfam will not be sponsoring Manchester United anytime soon. Biological male/female. They want that to be assigned female/male at birth. The reason, no one, whether cisgender or transgender, gets to choose what sex they're assigned at birth. So here we have Oxfam, a charity that presumably goes out to the parts of Africa that very few people will delve into, and they will be looking at a newborn baby there with malaria, and they will have to explain to that mother why they don't call her a woman or assign a gender to that child, instead of, oh, I don't know, helping it get immunity from malaria or something. It's just bonkers, isn't it?
I would have thought a far more useful initiative would be focused on how to improve processes surrounding disease prevention and control in the most deprived parts of the world, where the healthcare infrastructure simply isn't there to address those kind of problems. I think that there's just an absolutely remarkable waste of time, and I think in a way Oxfam's record, for me, I don't find it to be the most the kind of institution which ranks highly when it comes to matters of integrity, and I think that that's very much the case when it comes to these initiatives. That's following these kind of fashionable cultural trends. And ultimately that will result in neglecting the bread and butter in terms of combating poverty in the world.
No, exactly. I want to know how much money has been spent on this and where else that money could have been spent. There are no shortage of parts of the world that could benefit from Oxfam's cash at the minute, and human power, people power. Apologies, I've just done it. I will never work again, Rakib. I'm going to have to let you go there, but thank you very much. Dr. Rakib Hassan there, who is a social policy analyst, just picking through the hot mess that is Oxfam's advice to staff. Breastfeeding people is another one, by the way. That's just, I'll leave you with that image. Anyway, an Oxfam spokesperson has had this to say. We are proud of using inclusive language. We won't succeed in tackling poverty by excluding marginalised groups. This guide is not prescriptive. It is intended to help authors communicate with the diverse range of people with which we work. We are disappointed that some people have decided to misrepresent the advice offered in the guide, which clearly states that authors should respect the desires of those who want to be described as mother or father. There we go. All right, so yet another own goal from Oxfam, many people would say. But back to this big breaking news. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin. I'm joined now by Sir Geoffrey Nice, who's a human rights lawyer, who worked on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and was the lead prosecutor at the former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic's trial. Look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Look, what does this really mean for Putin?
Well, what it means for Putin is less important than what it means for the rest of us. Either he'll be deposed and handed over, or he'll disappear into Russia, or he'll die. Who knows? He may or may not be tried. That's not as important as the fact that this registers that the world's only international criminal court has found enough evidence to categorize this man as a criminal, and thus to make clear in official terms that which the rest of us have known for a long time and rather regret it hasn't been said earlier. This is a criminal trial, a criminal war led by a criminal. And that's going to have a very broad effect for the rest of us. What effect it has on Putin, we don't know.
It's worthwhile a little bit of context for people who are just joining us, because this broke in the last hour. We covered it at the top. But if you are just joining us, this is in relation to the ICC believing it has strong evidence that Vladimir Putin and his Children's Rights Commissioner have unlawfully deported Ukrainian children into Russia, put them into camps or put them up for adoption amongst the Russian population. They have been accused, and the Ukrainians are trying to say that this is a form of genocide. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's a wholly different question. genocide is always much harder to prove because it requires proof in the mind of the alleged offending génocideur, a very particular state of mind. And people have to remember that genocide, although it's said to be the world's worst crime, is not necessarily worse or more serious than the same acts committed as crimes against humanity or war crimes. So we shouldn't get too bogged down in genocide. However, there are many ways in which, or there are 5 ways in which genocide can be committed, and one of them is the transferring of children. So although no such a particular crime, I think, has ever been proved, well, very few genocides have been proved, it may be that in due course, the International Criminal Court will expand the present arrest warrant, or the present proposed indictment on which the arrest warrant is based, to include genocide by transfer of children, but not yet. And I think we should focus, because it's so valuable, on what's already there rather than complicating the issue.
Can I just get in your... I mean, you've got a direct relevance in this, hugely so, because you were the lead prosecutor at the former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic's trial. I think a lot of people thought that he may never face justice. The same, I think, is the general attitude when it comes to Putin now at the minute. Do you think that Putin will ever find himself in The Hague?
I have no better idea about that than you or your political commentators. The way that Milosevic found himself indicted was because there was a change of regime in Belgrade, and the successor regime found it appropriate to hand him over. Now, that could happen in Russia, but whether it will or not is something that your political commentators, I think, are far better to tell you about than I am. I'm not going to stray outside what limited knowledge I have.
No, that's all right. Well, look, I'm sure we will talk again on this. It's been great to have you on the show and appreciate you coming on. Thank you very, very much. That's Sir Geoffrey Nice there. Now, he's a human rights lawyer. He worked on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and was the lead prosecutor at the former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic's trial in relation to that big breaking news, international arrest warrants issued for Putin. Moving on. Prince Harry is in the news today. When is he not in the news, though? This time, he's suing a newspaper group. Yes, that's right. We'll bring you the latest on all of that. And, yes, you will not believe what the murderer Levi Bellfield wants you to pay for. I'm Patrick Christies. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
rumors. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
OK, loads to fit in. The Chancellor has scrapped the lifetime pensions allowance, which was £1 million. So now high flyers, although are they even really high flyers anyway? High flyers will be able to put aside as much as they want in their pension honeypots without being taxed. Jeremy Hunt says the goal is to keep senior professionals, particularly NHS doctors, in the workforce, consultants as well. But critics have argued that he could have just come up with a tailor-made scheme for them instead. So Labour's Shadow Chancellor has branded the move a £1 billion pensions bung for the 1%. Look, we all know what their line is. They're saying, oh, you're just protecting the wealthy again, aren't you? I am joined now by Baroness Ros Altman, who is a pensions expert and Conservative peer. Baroness, thank you very, very much. Look, is this just a bung for the rich or not?
Of course it's not. And I just find that this whole political football game that is being played with what is actually a really important decision is classic examples of what's gone wrong with pensions for so long. And, you know, what this policy does is it stops the pension system driving some of the most senior people out of public services, vital public services. And it's not just the NHS either. Senior police officers, firefighters, head teachers, ambulance staff, loads and loads of really important public sector workers have already or were about to retire just because of the pension penalty. And that makes no sense. And the Chancellor was right to try as quickly as possible to address it. But there's more.
Labour want to say, Labour are saying that, well, what you should have done is come up with something bespoke. So you should have just gone, well, we'll do it for public sector workers. I'm not being funny, but is that kind of like weird class warfare? Why is a doctor earning £1 million in their pension better than anyone else?
OK, so let's get something clear, first of all. The people who are caught by the lifetime allowance of £1 million are people who could be earning just about £80,000 a year. If they've got long service and they've got a pension worth about £50,000 a year, they will be caught by the £1 million lifetime allowance. We are not talking about millionaires here. We're talking about people, firstly, in the public sector or in defined benefit schemes, who've risen to senior levels. It could be senior nurses. It could be, people who have done well in other areas of our vital public services. Not millionaires, not people earning millions or even hundreds of thousands. And also, for people in the private sector, the lifetime allowance has never made any sense. Because if you want to control how much higher rate taxpayers or the higher earners put into their pensions, you've had the ability to change the annual allowance, but then don't punish them for good investment performance.
Well, this is it. Why should you disincentivise people who want to go on and earn a load of money? And I can't help but wonder whether or not that's the message that Labour are sending. It's all very well and good if you want to become a millionaire, if you want to work in our beloved NHS, that's fine. But if you just want to do well in life in general, the Labour Party is not the party for you. Baroness Ros Altman, thank you very much. Pensions expert and Conservative member of the House of Lords. But I'm going to continue this conversation now with Sebastian Rees, who's a senior researcher at public services think tank Reform. Sebastian, thank you very much. Now, I'm getting loads of emails in from people who just say, look, I've worked all my life, my wife has worked all my life, I'm reading one now, we have managed to get our pension pot just above the £1 million mark, we are not rich, why does Labour want to punish us?
Well, look, Patrick, thanks very much for having me on. I think, understandably, this is an area that government wanted to look at. We know that the pensions allowances have been frozen for a few years now, and this clearly required something more of a look. But I think on this one, it does really fail a basic test of fairness, and that's this. In a time where families up and down the country are struggling and where budgets are really, really tight, this does feel like a huge giveaway to a tiny number of already very, very wealthy people.
Just got to ask you, because I've heard the fairness argument before today. What is fair about making people who pay the most amount of tax their entire lives, can probably fund about 3 nurses every flipping month, then not be able to save more than £1 million in their pension pot without being clobbered again now? What's fair about that?
So let's be very clear about the kind of people we're talking about here. So these are the kind of people who can afford to put more than £40,000 a year into their pension pot. And to put that into context, that's more than the average person earns each year. These are people who can put more than £1 million in their pension pot when they retire. And that's more than most workers in this country make in their lifetime. So it's all very well and good to say that there are questions about how fair it is to kind of continue to tax people at a higher rate. But in a time where everyone's being asked to tighten their belts, we're really talking about a small fraction of people who are the wealthiest earners. I think you're exactly right in saying that this applies across both the public and private sector, and Labour might be kind of evasive in the sense of not pointing out the fact that the top 1% who they're targeting with their own proposals often does compromise public sector workers as well, so the most senior doctors. But really, this is a small number of people, and it's a £1 billion giveaway at a time where government just can't afford that.
All right, Sebastian, thank you very much. Sorry to be squeezed for time there, but great to have you on. I'll talk to you again soon. Sebastian Rees there, senior researcher at public services think tank Reform. Look, from where I'm sitting, the Labour Party have been absolutely done here, and they're trying to rattle around and say, oh, OK, well, we'll do it for doctors instead. And no, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, gonorrhea cases. That's right, people. Welcome back. Gonorrhea cases in England have resurged since the easing of COVID restrictions, with officials warning people about the recent rise in cases. Data shows that diagnoses in the first 9 months of 2022, flipping out, hit 56,327. That, believe it or not, is 21% higher than the same period in 2019. I'm joined now by Nadia Essex, who is a dating coach. Nadia, thank you very much. This, of course, is shocking stuff, and people are being urged to use protection and get themselves checked.
Yeah, I mean, I think my initial gut reaction is, oh, God, being told what to do again about our bodies get lost. But actually, the 51,000 is huge, and there's thousands of people walking around that don't know they have it. And yeah, I think it's just get that message out. Go and get tested. You should really be having an STI test every 6 months anyway if you're active. And use protection. I mean, it's not rocket science.
No, and I'm actually quite staggered that some of the sectors of society who are apparently getting gonorrhea more regularly than others is the elderly population, as they apparently become more sexually promiscuous, Nadia.
Yeah, I mean, COVID, schmovid, like, they're back and they're ready to go. And my clients usually range about sort of 30 to 45, I would say. That's the majority of my clients. But in the last 6 months, I've seen a massive rise in the over 50s, emailing me, messaging me, DMing me. I'm ready to get back out there. I want help. And going out and dating more, which I think is a good thing. But I think for women, I know a lot of my women that have been through the menopause, they don't use protection because they can't get pregnant. And so they're just like, it's no big deal. It's not a problem, and the men prefer it and they don't use it. But actually, they've forgotten that, what we get taught in school when they were in school a long time ago is that you can still catch things. So, all those pesky pensioners are bonking and causing an outbreak.
It's madness. It's madness. Look, Nadia, thank you very much. Short and sweet, and I won't make the obvious joke about some of my sexual escapades there. Nadia Essex there, who is a dating coach. Fantastic, reacting to the shocking news. Gonorrhea on the rampage. Right, now, a reminder of this afternoon's big breaking news, more serious. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, accusing him of war crimes. We'll delve into that and much more. I'm Patrick Christies. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christies, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, OK, welcome back, everybody. It's just gone 5 p.m. I'm Patrick Christies, and this is GB News. I've got a massive final hour of this show coming your way. Big breaking news that took place whilst we were live on air. Yes, there is now an international arrest warrant that's been issued for Vladimir Putin. We will tell you exactly what all of this means and why in the next hour. And could we be finally seeing an end to strikes? That's right, get back to work. That's the message. Even unions now, some of them are urging their workers to take the deals on the table. Rishi wanted to stop the boats. Has he actually stopped the strikes? In other news as well, though, we have got Oxfam. Yes, they have decided that their staff possibly shouldn't use words like mother, father, women, mankind, because these are all deeply offensive. Some people are saying, why don't you just focus on, oh, I don't know, saving children? That'd be nice. Anyway, in other news as well, Levi Bellfield apparently wants to use your money, the taxpayers' money, to help fund his legal case against the government so that he can marry a mystery woman in prison. How do you feel about paying for that? Make sure that you get in touch with me. I will be with you for the next hour. Well, loads to go out there, people. GBviews at gbnews.uk is that inbox. I want to know what you think about Oxfam all but banning the words mother and father. How do you feel about that? And whether or not you want to pay for Levi Bellfield, a convicted murderer, to be able to have a wedding in prison. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 3 minutes past 5. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against the Russian president. It's accusing Vladimir Putin of war crimes against Ukraine, including the unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. The Kremlin has called questions raised by the ICC outrageous and unacceptable, saying any decisions made about Russia are null and void. But the ICC president says the allegations are credible.
This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
Well, Ukrainian MP Andrei Osadchuk told us he has no doubt Putin will end up behind bars.
We know about thousands of cases of Ukrainian kids forcibly deported from Ukraine to the territory of Russian Federation. In fact, by doing this, they want to replace native Ukrainian population with Russian population. The history of international justice is saying that usually it takes a long time to bring people like Putin to accountability. So that's why I don't have any doubts that Putin earlier or later will be sitting in prison.
Meanwhile, China's president will hold strategic cooperation talks with President Putin next week. Beijing and Moscow struck a no-limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries have warned Beijing against supplying Moscow with weapons, but China has denied such plans, criticising Western weapon supplies to Ukraine. The US president has thanked the Taoiseach for standing together with his country against Russia's invasion on Ukraine. Joe Biden has met Leo Varadkar in the White House for the traditional St. Patrick's Day meeting between the two leaders. Speaking from Washington, D.C., Mr. Biden says they had a lot to talk about around deepening economic ties between the US and Ireland. The Taoiseach praised the president's support of Ireland's position on Brexit, saying the new Windsor framework will be important for British, Irish and European relations. Now, it's understood striking doctors are beginning intensive talks on pay with the Health Secretary today to continue over the weekend. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer. Downing Street says the pay deal would cost an additional £4 billion. But Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, says pay talks should have happened sooner.
Rishi Sunak and his ministers did not sit down and have that proper negotiation on pay for a very, very long time. And it's been estimated that about 140,000 operations and appointments were cancelled because of the impact of that industrial action. And that's even before you take the junior doctors' strike into account that's just started. So, the Conservatives have got to learn from this. They can't make the same mistakes when it comes to the junior doctors.
Meanwhile, the Education Secretary is meeting with unions today for intensive talks over teacher pay conditions and workload reduction. The unions have agreed not to strike over the next 2 weeks as discussions continue. A couple have been convicted for their role in the death of a 15-month-old baby. Jacob Lennon's mother, Louise, was found guilty of neglect and allowing the death of a child, while 33-year-old Jacob Drummond was found guilty of abuse with intent to harm. The final cause of Jacob's death, a fatal brain injury. They'll both be sentenced on the 24th of April. Police Constable Mary Ellen Betley-Smith will keep her job despite being found guilty for attacking a former football player with a taser and baton. Former Aston Villa striker Dalian Atkinson died after being kicked at least twice in the head by another officer, Benjamin Monk, who's been jailed for 8 years for manslaughter. Ms Betley-Smith was cleared of assaulting Mr Atkinson after a trial, but the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there was a gross misconduct disciplinary case to answer for her use of force. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It's Kate's first time at the parade as Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
All right, let's start as we mean to go on with that big breaking news. And the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin, but Russia says the arrest warrant is meaningless. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has tweeted to say those responsible for horrific war crimes in Ukraine must be brought to justice. We welcome the step taken by the independent ICC to hold those at the top of the Russian regime, including Vladimir Putin, to account. Work must continue to investigate the atrocities committed. Well, to discuss what all of this really means, I am joined now by Joshua Rosenberg, who is a legal commentator. Joshua, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, the ICC have issued an arrest warrant for Putin. That appears to centre around the allegations that Ukrainian children were forcibly taken into Russia, put in camps or farmed out for adoption by the Russian government to Russian families. The Ukrainians are calling this genocide. Is that right?
It's not genocide, but it is a war crime. What the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan KC, a British barrister, has said in the last few minutes is that his office, his investigators have identified incidents including the deportation of at least hundreds of children taken from orphanages and children's care homes. They allege that many of these children have been given up for adoption in the Russian Federation. The law was changed in Russia to expedite the conferral of Russian citizenship. And the prosecutor alleges that there's an intention to permanently remove these children from their own country. They were protected persons under the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention, of course, deals with the rights of civilians during war. And Karim Khan said that he had told the Security Council last September that the investigation of alleged illegal deportation of children from Ukraine was a priority, and the human impact of these crimes was made clear during his recent visit to Ukraine.
OK, so what happens now to Putin? Because he just probably won't leave Russia and won't face justice.
He hasn't left Russia for the past year, as far as we know, and you're absolutely right. If he doesn't leave Russia, then he's not going to be arrested, unless, of course, he is deposed within Russia. But the aim is that if he does leave Russia, then any country that signed up to the International Criminal Court would actually be under an obligation to arrest him and, in principle, to bring him for trial in The Hague. Now, while he stays in Russia, he's pretty safe, but who knows what's going to happen in the future.
So what does all of this mean? Because Putin's mouthpieces are saying this is meaningless, and as long as he stays in Russia, it is, isn't it?
It's not meaningless, but it's certainly not going to have any immediate effect. It obviously has symbolic effect. It must be something, we know it is something that has been welcomed in Ukraine. We know that the Russians have said this is nothing to do with us. We're not signed up to the court. We don't have to take any notice of it. But it does show, doesn't it, that the international community is determined to take action. What we know about this case is that unusually the arrest warrants have been made public. We don't know about other other proposals to arrest others in Russia for other crimes, or indeed to arrest Putin for other war crimes. The court President has made it clear that this has been made public in order to try to prevent other children being deported in the future. I suppose if even a few children are protected from being taken from their homes to Russia, that will be an achievement.
Absolutely. Look, thank you very, very much for coming on at short notice. That's Joshua Rosenberg, their legal commentator, reacting to the breaking news that took place during this very show, which is that there is now an international arrest warrant out against Vladimir Putin. So there we go. But we're moving on matters closer to home now, because there's fresh hope today that this epidemic of strikes that has done so much damage to our economy in the last few months is finally coming to an end. The government and education unions have agreed to hold intensive talks on the issues, which have sparked a series of strikes by teachers in recent months. It comes a day after health unions agreed to a pay deal that they'll now put to their members, at least most of them did anyway. And, of course, the RMT, so the railways, they've called off strikes. And when you look at all of this in the round, I can't help but wonder whether or not, actually, this is starting to look like a little bit of a win for Rishi Sunak, but a good political deal nonetheless, because the unions could also claim this as a win. Let's talk now to Socialist Party trade union organiser Rob Williams. Rob, thank you very much. Look, it's a sad day for trade unionists like yourself, Rob, isn't it? You know, you wanted whopping inflation-busting pay rises, and Rishi Sunak's managed to hold firm and just give you about 5%.
Well, it's not enough, and actually, you've actually said yourself that it's not enough. The point is, though, is that this isn't a victory for Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak has been pushed back. This was the government that told us in November they weren't prepared to negotiate, that they were, there was no new money on the table. But what has happened, of course, is how we've seen an incredible mobilisation of workers. 500,000 on February the 1st, 600,000 on Wednesday, on budget day itself.
Yes, and Keir Starmer didn't even mention you, did he?
But more to be won.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it is a win for him, surely, because if NHS staff in England accept an offer of a 5% pay rise and a one-off backlog bonus of around 1,200 quid, he has saved himself and the taxpayer billions of pounds, because originally they wanted around 13% as a pay rise, didn't they? So it is a win.
Well, we don't think the deal should be accepted. Socialist Party members in those unions voted against recommending acceptance of that. So we think more should be won. We think the offer should be rejected. We think the strikes should be escalated. But I tell you what has happened here is that just before Christmas, the nurses unions leaders said to Rishi Sunak, you even talked about pay with us and we'll suspend the action. He didn't. And I tell you what's happened since, Patrick, a new generation of workers, many of whom have never taken action before, whatever happens, and I hope they reject, but even if they accept, the lesson they will have learned is that if you take action, then you get more off the employer, you get more off the government. This is a government that's been pushed back, but we think they could be pushed back more.
OK, I mean, the thing is, Rishi Sunak could very easily have looked at the winter of discontent that was being wreaked across the nation, couldn't he, and gone, I'm going to panic now and I'm going to give in to what you want. And he did a calculation in his mind, didn't he, which was that if I wait this out, it's all very well and good you saying that you want workers to continue the strike action, but surely they can't afford to, because they've been out on strike so much, including over Christmas. And when you look at the fact that the GMB, the Unison, and the Royal College of Nursing, they're basically saying, look, take this deal now. I mean, is it fair to say that you, as a Socialist Party trade union organiser, you are in a very, very small minority of people now, aren't you? You are extreme.
Well, I think this government is extreme. I think the employers are in the extreme here, aren't we? They're looking after a very, very small minority of the super rich. Look, the point here is that workers will decide. These votes will happen. The workers will decide themselves. I think it's far from certain that workers will accept the deal. But let's see. But I tell you what will happen is that this is a government that is telling these workers that obviously this is the deal for this year. Next year, they're putting 5% on the table on the basis that inflation is going to be a lot lower. It's 2 weeks to the next financial year. And inflation RPI inflation is over 13%. CPI inflation is over 10%. I tell you what, if Rishi Sunak is confident that inflation is falling, well, why doesn't he say 5% or inflation, preferably RPI, whichever is the greatest?
Well,
he can't guarantee that. And that's why, Patrick, workers are not going to be satisfied. Whatever they vote, these strikes are not over.
Maybe it's because he's not actually the kind of heartless so-and-so that a lot of trade unionists like to say. Maybe he thinks that the workers do deserve a pay rise that might end up turning out to be above inflation. Maybe he thinks that that's it, and that's quite a nice thing, isn't it? And can I just ask as well, you mentioned about the 100,000 or so people who were outside marching on Parliament on Wednesday when the budget was announced, a budget that didn't include anything, by the way, about the public sector, and you had a Labour leader there standing up, Prime Minister's question times. Go on, Sir Keir, you've got 6 big ones at the Prime Minister here, and he asked him about Gary flipping Lineker. He didn't talk about the 100,000 people who were outside protesting for the things that you want. How did that make you feel?
Well, first of all, if Rishi wanted a pay rise, he could have done it months ago. Secondly, on Starmer, look, Starmer doesn't represent, in my opinion, those workers who are marching past. I mean, look, I've got nothing against him asking questions on Gary Lineker and what happened there. It was shocking what happened. But you're right, workers need a party, a workers' party, a socialist party, in my opinion, that supports workers taking action. And Starmer doesn't do that.
There's a few front pages today. I've done this a couple of times already. Look, you've got the Metro, you've got the Eye, you've got the Mirror, nurses deal at last on the front of the Mirror there. And, you know, like I've said before, they're not exactly right-leaning newspapers, this lot, are they? So they appear to be, I think, maybe gauging a public mood, Rob, which is, can we just all move on from this now? Is it not fair to suggest that you are now out of kilter with that public mood by wanting to extend strike action? Can you read the room, Rob?
Well, I tell you what, Patrick, the difference between us and the Tories, we're not afraid of democracy. They're the ones bringing in even more anti-union laws. Look, the members of those unions will decide, and that's fair enough, you know, and there will be a debate and a discussion whether this deal is acceptable. The point I'm making is, though, the cost of living squeeze isn't going anywhere, and therefore workers will be forced to fight still further.
I just wonder whether or not you're bricking it a little bit, Rob, because Rishi Sunak can point to the last three and a half weeks, you know, there's an illegal migration bill on the table. The latest polls show 52% of people agree completely with it. Just 16% disagree entirely with it. So there's a very vocal small minority of people there. He's got the Windsor Framework, he's got the AUKUS Defence Pact, he's got a deal with Macron in France. He might have stopped the strikes. I mean, good grief, all of a sudden, just like that, you might have a few more years of a Tory government, Rob.
Hey, what a shock. Tories racist divide and rule to try and win votes. Listen, I tell you what, if he's looking at Macron, who used undemocratic presidential decrees to get pensioner tax through the French Assembly yesterday, you should see what happened overnight and in France at the moment. Yeah. Massive protest, massive strike action. It's coming Rishi's way.
Oh, there he is. Rob, I always enjoy our chats. Thank you very much, mate. Look after yourself. Take care. It's Rob Williams, he's Socialist Party trade union organiser and a good sport as well, it must be said. A very good sport. Right. So I've got loads coming your way, actually. We are going to touch on Prince Harry. He's in the news today. When is he not in the news? But this time he's suing a newspaper group. I do also want to give you a heads up about something that we're doing later on. I went out and about and spoke to ordinary members of the public. You know, Oxfam wants its employees to ditch the words mother and father because it might be offensive. Women, they want it spelt with an X, so it's womanxon. It's just all gone absolutely bonkers. And Levi Bellfield, right, the ridiculously aggressive murderer who's serving a life term in prison, he wants you, the taxpayer, everyone that we know as taxpayers, to fork out for his legal bid so that he can get married to a mystery woman in prison. How on earth is he even allowing visitors, this guy? I'm Patrick Christies, and this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Loads to fit in, so let's get cracking with Prince Harry because he's launched a bid to have part of the publisher of the Mail on Sunday's case in their libel dispute thrown out by the High Court. The case relates to an article about the Duke of Sussex's challenge against the Home Office over security arrangements. Joining me now is GB News' royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, thank you very much. Yes, finally we get to chat about this. So, What's going on?
Well, it's all very complicated. Basically, this is a preliminary hearing today in court, and it's all over Prince Harry suing the publishers of the Mail on Sunday over an article they wrote about Prince Harry's separate legal action against the Home Office over their decision not to allow him to pay for his own police protection when he's in the UK. In July, the judge in this case ruled in Harry's favour, saying that the article in question was defamatory because the article basically said that Prince Harry's PR team had spun it to make it look like, to any ordinary reader, it would look as if that Prince Harry had always offered to pay for his own police protection when he's in the UK, but legal documents show that's not the case at all. So that's what the article said. Prince Harry says that he has always offered to pay for his own police protection. He offered to pay in January of 2020 during the Sandringham Summit when he was thrashing out the negotiations of stepping back as a working member of the royal family. The Associated Newspapers, who publishes Mail on Sunday, is basically saying that, hold on, he didn't make that official. He only said that in passing comments, which is why they wrote the article. But they also are using two defences. The Associated Newspapers lawyers, they are saying that honest opinion has been expressed in this article, which is a defence for defamation cases. And also they argued that Prince Harry, no serious harm came to Prince Harry's reputation because of this article. There was some negotiations outside of court to see if they could come to some kind of settlement. That clearly hasn't happened because the case has gone to a preliminary hearing today. Not many details to exactly what was said today. The judge has not made a decision either way as to who's won this case, but I think we'll find out perhaps in a couple of weeks. But this is just one of a number of different lawsuits Prince Harry is involved with. So he's got this one, which we just talked about, the separate one against the Home Office, and then 3 separate ones against different British tabloids, Mirror Group newspapers, News Group newspapers, and another Associated Newspapers claim against alleged unlawful information gathering, i.e. alleged phone hacking, as an example. So to summarise, Patrick, if you're still with me...
Yeah, I am.
Prince Harry is at war with the British press and still is at war with the British government as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, really. I mean, I tell you what, one of the best jobs in the world right now would be to be Prince Harry's legal team, wouldn't it, really? Because the money would be rolling their way, one would have thought. Look, Cameron, thank you very much for picking through that particular legal minefield for us. Much appreciated. Thank you for sticking around as well. Cameron Walker there, who's GB News' royal reporter, bringing you up to date with the latest on Prince Harry and the legal cases. Now, with the Windsor framework, NHS offer and the AUKUS deal, it appears that Rishi Sunak is racking up rather an impressive tally in the last few months. But is it enough to stop Keir Starmer and the Labour Party? Polling seems to say no, but it depends which polls you look at, and they've been wrong before. With me now to discuss whether or not Rishi Sunak is actually smashing Keir Starmer out the park, Joanne Nadler, author and journalist, and Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Great stuff. Joanne, always ladies first on the show. Joanne, I will start with you. I mean, it looks a little bit to me like Rishi Sunak is doing quite a good job.
Well, I think that in his favour there have been some incremental gains, without doubt. And to a certain extent, I think that is confounding people that had written him off. But I do think it's important to get that into some kind of context. And the word incremental, I think, is key to this, that, you know, there have been a few things where he's clearly made some progress. But equally, I think with regards to, say, the new working on the Northern Ireland Protocol and the budget, that devils are being revealed in the details. And therefore, on that sort of technical point alone, I think we have to reserve judgment. And on the wider issue, I think, of is he creating a sort of a narrative, a story as to why people should consider voting Conservative yet again, when all around them they see quite a lot of sort of dysfunction. I think we're not there yet, quite frankly. I don't think Keir Starmer is articulating anything particularly exciting, but
well, this is it. Yeah, this is it. I'll just cut in there because I want to come back to you, if that's all right. I'll just get Peter in. So, Peter, obviously former editor of Labour List. I mean, the thing that I would look at now is, all right, Rishi can at least hold on and say, I've done or am doing this, this and this. I mean, what are Labour doing? What's Keir Starmer doing?
Well, the Tories have stabilised after the kind of summer of chaos with Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss. Keir Starmer's pitch has always been completely different. It's been one about competence and another one about fairness. And the other thing I'd say, sort of from within the Labour Party, is that there was recognition the Windsor Agreement on Northern Ireland looked pretty positive in terms of the economics of it and ensuring peace and prosperity. But the budget is pretty underwhelming. About 2/3 of people said they either don't know or they oppose the contents of the budget. And perhaps because we've got used to so much turmoil...
Isn't that standard, though? But isn't that normal? I mean, I don't think that the vast majority of people listen to a Chancellor on Budget Day and go, I got every word of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a fair assessment because many people, perhaps including me, don't take in all the detail, but polling pulls out individual policies and asks voters if they think they'll be better or worse off and if they oppose it. So it fell fairly flat. About 2/3 said, I don't know, or oppose. The other point is that the polling has moved around a bit. There's still a fairly healthy lead for Labour of just under 20%.
There is. Now, Joanne, can I ask you a little bit about soft Tories, please, and quiet Tories, shy Tories, because I'm looking at some of the detail on this, and in the blue wall seats, there is now just a 1-point gap between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak as leaders, as men, as party leaders. And I think that's interesting because I think that for a little while the Tories lost a lot of those, should we say, comfortable, quite quiet middle classes, OK? And I just wonder whether or not they're getting them back now under Rishi, and that could be massive, Joanne.
Well, I think it's interesting that Peter talks about Keir Starmer elevating competence to being something of import, which of course it is. And I think that if he wants to fight this next election on the basis of competence, then frankly, Rishi is already giving him something of a run for his money. I mean, what I'm saying actually is that both parties need to come up with something a little bit more exciting than competence. And there certainly was a moment, following all the debacles of last year, where competence was a sensible line of attack for Keir Starmer. But I don't think that there's enough to it now for him to claim that that's a particularly distinctive approach. What you're saying, I think, is right, Patrick. I think those people who perhaps don't want to publicly associate themselves with the Conservative Party, but were able to disassociate themselves with it on the basis that what a mess it had made of everything last year, I think, naturally they'll want to come back to their sort of their natural instincts and vote Conservative. But what we have to remember is that those kind of people tend to be in an older demographic. And I think neither party has actually been able to sort of reach out to those younger generations coming up and really explaining to them why they should consider voting Conservative in the case of the Conservatives or Labour in Keir Starmer's case. There's nothing particularly exciting going on, even though there are huge, big cultural issues, for instance, out there that people in the street, I think, are genuinely concerned about, and politicians are struggling to articulate something that's going to appeal to them.
Do you think, Peter, that the wind is being sucked out of Keir Starmer's sails? If Rishi does manage to stop the strikes, etc., do some dent when it comes to what's going on in the Channel, that Northern Ireland is a much better picture than it was when he took over, that the economy isn't going into this, recession, for example, that was the word I was looking for, recession, then actually Rishi Sunak can point to it and go, well, we did all of this, and I did it all quite quickly. What has Keir done, apart from following him around with a mop and a bucket and go, well, there's that very specific bit of policy there that I don't quite like?
Well, Rishi Sunak's had a decent few weeks because he's consolidated the government. There's a bit more an air of calm, and he's stabilised his party. They're not revolting anymore in one sense of the word. They're not fighting amongst each other. But for Keir Starmer, I think he can win on leadership and on the economy because polls show Keir Starmer is trusted. He ran a national institution in the CPS, and he's believable, and he's seen as competent. And on the economy, which has obviously been another weak point for Labour over the last decade, sadly, I think it will come back to that Ronald Reagan question, 1980, are you better off than you were 5 years ago? And Labour can still win on that, very much so.
It's fascinating stuff. Look, thank you very much, both of you. Really enjoyed that chat. Joanne Nadler, author and journalist, and Peter Edwards as well, former editor of Labour List. Yeah, look, ladies and gents, I just wanted to have that conversation because I can't help but wonder whether or not the tide is starting to turn. I want to know what you think about this. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Yes, by virtue of him being in power, well, Rishi Sunak can do things, but he is actually doing things. And maybe you now feel more optimistic about him than you did before. Get in touch. We've got loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, though. But first, it is your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Good afternoon, it's 5:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez with your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's been accused of war crimes against Ukraine, suspected of unlawfully deporting people, including children, to Russia. The Kremlin has described the allegations as outrageous and says it doesn't recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, says Russia must be held accountable.
This is a historic moment in the conflict in Ukraine. The International Criminal Court, which operates independently, has issued an indictment for President Putin and the Children's Commissioner for appalling crimes against children. And whilst they operate independently, it's really important the international community support them and give them the tools to do the job, which is why I'll be hosting on Monday with my Dutch opposite number 40 countries from around the world to give them the support to conduct the investigations, to look after witnesses, to care for the victims so that they can see this through and, we hope, have accountability for those appalling crimes.
It's understood striking doctors will hold intensive talks on pay with the Health Secretary to continue over the weekend. The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay increase for junior doctors, saying their pay has fallen in real terms by 26% since 2008. Meanwhile, NHS workers will vote on whether to accept a new pay offer. Downing Street says the pay deal would cost an additional £4 billion. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It's Kate's first time at the parade as Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Here's a question for you. Should serial killer Levi Bellfield be allowed to use legal aid to fight a ruling that stops him marrying his mysterious girlfriend? I'm Patrick Christies, and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, Oxfam has been criticised for issuing an inclusive language guide, and it tells staff to avoid using the words mother and father. The 92-page document also says that English is the language of a colonising nation. We're going to have two voices on this, but I'm going to go to the first one, which is Peter Tatchell, who is LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, so good to named after himself, of course, and Toby Young, director of the Free Speech Union. Now, Peter, I'm aware that you're a bit pressed for time, so I'll start with you, if that's all right, and then we'll steer ourselves towards Toby. Peter, is English really the language of a colonising nation?
Well, it is, but we shouldn't hold that against the English language. The English language is a great gift to humanity. It has made an extraordinary contribution to human civilization around the world. But what I would say about this is that whatever people think about this particular language guide, and it is only a guide, it's not compulsory, whatever you think about it, please don't hold it against Oxfam's amazing work that it does to lift poor people out of poverty.
Peter, I am going to step in here and just use the word Haiti. Peter, Oxfam does not have a great track record at dealing with things like, allegations of things like bunga parties in Haiti with essentially minors. I mean, it's not great, Peter, is it, in every aspect of the world? People might be saying, why are they using money that could be spent helping third world countries on telling its staff that the words mother and father might be bad, Peter?
Well, first of all, there have been some wrongful incidents with Oxfam during its history, and I deplore and condemn that. But they are a small blip on an otherwise extraordinary, powerful record of helping millions and millions of people get lifted out of poverty to live happier, healthier lives. But going back to the issue of the language, it is only a guideline. It's not compulsory. But I agree that some of the suggestions they make, I think even for me, are a bit far-stretched. I mean, it says don't use the word stand with because it might offend people who cannot stand. Well, in that context, standing with someone is not about standing up. It's about showing support and compassion and solidarity. So I think that's a bit misplaced. The same with the word headquarters. I don't see that as being colonialist to use the word headquarters. Organizations have headquarters. People need to know where the headquarters are if they need to make complaints. So yes. I think this is well-intentioned, but maybe in some areas, I think has gone a bit too far.
OK, Toby, I'll bring you in now. Toby Young, director of the Free Speech Union. I mean, I suppose Oxfam is obviously entitled to say whatever it wants to its staff in that sense, but it's whether or not doing things like replacing the word women with an X instead of the E, which I think I don't even know how to pronounce that, Wumilkson, maybe. I mean, is that the erasure of women?
Yes, I think lots of feminist defenders of sex-based women's rights are understandably a little bit cheesed off about this 92-page language guide because it does seem to erase women. You're advised not to use the word mother, but to replace it with people who become pregnant. And that's one of numerous examples intended not to exclude trans women, but which end up making women who believe in the reality of biological sex feel excluded. As so much work that's intended to be inclusive, that is actually a smokescreen under which a lot of people who don't toe the fashionable line on a range of woke issues, end up being excluded. But I think the problem with this document, Patrick, is that, you have to ask yourself, why will advising its staff on what vocabulary to use and spending resources on producing this 92-page document, how is that going to alleviate worldwide famine, which is the mission of Oxfam? After all, it just seems a ludicrous distraction. And to condemn English as, the language of a colonizing nation. I mean, Oxfam has only just become eligible for funding again from the Foreign Office after, as you said earlier, it's been embroiled in a number of scandals in which these allegations of sexual abuse have been levied at staff members in Haiti and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It was banned from applying for government funding between 2018 and 2022. It's just become eligible again. And almost the first thing it does is publish this 92-page document which condemns England as a colonizing power. Why would the Foreign Office want to now fund this organisation?
Well, Toby, I'll come back to you. But, Peter, just one more from you, if that's all right. Earlier on, and I'll play the clip shortly, I went out and just asked women on the streets of London whether or not they thought that the term mother was a good word, and the vast majority of them said it would be quite offensive to remove it. I just wonder, Peter, why on earth are companies like Oxfam, who should be saving children's lives, going out of their way to, well, from what I can gather, just appease the trans community, which is 0.0 whatever % of the population globally? I mean, why bother?
Well, it doesn't matter how many trans people there are, or how many gay people, or how many Jewish people. Everyone deserves equal human rights. But on Toby's point, I mean, the term mother, they do say that if a parent wishes to be called mother or father, that should be respected. So it's not trying to enforce a hardline interpretation, but it is trying to use language that's inclusive for everyone. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But I think you have to temper it. You have to be temperate and be careful because, if we create a culture where people are afraid about making a mistake about using the wrong word, then that's a kind of terrorisation.
It's a bit late for that, Peter.
That's wrong.
It's a bit late for that. People are absolutely bricking themselves over whether or not they accidentally use the wrong word. And the rules seem to change as well. We can't use BAME anymore. Now it apparently is people of colour. But that was bad 20 minutes ago, from what I could gather. Peter, I'm aware that you've got to get going, so I will leave you there. I will keep Toby on the line as Peter Tatchell off of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. And, Toby, before I come back to you, I want to play a few clips. I went out and about earlier and was asking the fair people of, Paddington, actually, just up the Paddington Riviera, as I call it, what they thought about all this, all this nonsense. Go on. Mother and father offensive?
No.
Why not?
Because they define particular roles and they're sex-based.
No.
Why not?
Because that's, I mean...
Are you just a bit exasperated by all of this rubbish?
No. It doesn't offend me, no. It's just a bit crazy, really, isn't it? If it's not broken, don't fix it.
They also want to do, instead of using women plural, they want it to be with an X instead of the E.
Okay, so we're Max. We're Max. Is that how it's pronounced?
Just try again.
We're Max.
Son.
No, sorry.
Not for you, no. Women, I can't do it either, but there we go. Toby, I'll bring you back in. Now, look, I mean, this is, I think, as we've just seen there, quite laughable stuff, isn't it, really, from Oxfam? And is this what we're seeing now, which is a virtue signalling at all costs, as opposed to actually just doing your job?
As opposed to actually being virtuous.
Yeah, yes, which is their job.
I think it's, I think there can be little doubt, Patrick, that Oxfam is not a non-partisan charity wholly devoted to alleviating famine across the globe. It is, I think, increasingly a left-wing lobby group, an ultra-woke campaigning group. The current chief executive, he was acclaimed as a future global leader by the World Economic Forum in 2012. He was the deputy director of the IPPR, which is a left...
Oh, that was Toby Young there. Toby Young, we've lost him, but there we go. We're moving on anyway. Toby Young there, director of the Free Speech Union. I do find it absolutely fascinating. I mean, Oxfam, literally, we all know what happened in Haiti and the Congo, etc. And, all they have to do now, apparently, is slap a rainbow flag on something and say you can't use the word woman because it might offend trans people. And it's like, oh, there you go, all is forgiven. Anyway, an Oxfam spokesperson has had this to say. We are proud of using inclusive language. We won't succeed in tackling poverty by excluding marginalised groups. This guide is not prescriptive. It is intended to help authors communicate with the diverse range of people which we work with. We are disappointed that some people have decided to misrepresent the advice offered by the guide, which clearly states that authors should respect the desires of those who want to be described as mother or father. Right, moving on. That's enough of Oxfam. Yes, this is another story that will no doubt get you all going, because serial killer Levi Bellfield reportedly wants to marry his girlfriend, I know, and he wants to use legal aid, your money, taxpayers' money, to make it happen. Bellfield is serving 2 whole life sentences for the murders of 2 women and 13-year-old Millie Dowler. He applied to marry his girlfriend last year and is said to have made a bid for legal aid to challenge the decision to block his marriage. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab has pledged to change the law to prevent those serving whole life sentences from getting married. To get the reaction, I am joined by Donna Jones, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. Donna, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Why on earth is Levi Bellfield allowed to have a girlfriend?
I mean, Patrick, this story is literally beyond belief. This is a man who, as you've just said, is serving not 1, but 2 whole life sentences, meaning that he will never be released from prison unless it is on exceptional and or very compassionate grounds. In other words, if he's about to die. This is a man who is one of Britain's most violent sexual attackers, murderers. Not only did he kill poor little Millie Dowler, but he tortured and raped her. He bludgeoned Marsha, another one of his victims, to death. He is an extremely violent man. Why people have been going to visit him in prison in terms of women who are wanting to support him is up to them. But the idea of him using taxpayers' money to challenge our government, our legal system, to be able to get married, to have rights to get married under the European Court of Human Rights is quite beyond me, and it is absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, we did have a psychologist on earlier who explained why, in this case anyway, a woman, so why some women do fall in love with vile serial killers, so we'll park that one for there. That's very much a choice for them. But in terms of the law at the minute, the idea that this guy, who can be about as depraved as you come, can use taxpayers' cash in the middle of a cost of living crisis to try to marry somebody. I mean, do you agree with Dominic Raab? We need to change the law here.
I absolutely do agree with him completely. And, you know, I will be deeply frustrated, particularly as somebody who is a strong continued supporter of Brexit and leaving the European Union, if the European Court of Human Rights under the Human Rights Act is able to yet again intercept into our British legal system and say that the British government is wrong in stopping this monster from being able to get access to legal aid to prevent him from having the wedding that he wants at the taxpayers' costs whilst he is a resident of HMP. I think he's in prison in County Durham. It is a disgrace. He is a very, very dangerous individual. Now, having said that, I do believe in that people can go through rehabilitation, and I believe in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. But this is a man who is never likely to walk the streets of Britain, and therefore it is not a sensible use of taxpayers' money. And yes, I do support the Lord Chancellor in his comments today.
What about the victims' families in all of this as well, though, Donna? I mean, the idea that Levi Bellfield is getting any joy, which he obviously is in one way or another, out of having female visitors come and meet him and finding one who is of a certain persuasion enough to marry him, want to marry him. I mean, should he be banned from having visitors? I mean, should he be banned from having almost any joy?
Well, I mean, look, that's a very difficult one, isn't it? No, I don't think he should be banned from having visitors. And I think if he is showing signs of getting better, of tackling the trauma that's led to whatever has caused him in his life to be such a violent offender, and there's a lot of coverage of Levi Bellfield about his childhood, his father dying when he was 10 years of age, his questionable relationship with his mother. So actually, you know, if he is prepared to tackle some of the things that have gone on in his childhood that have led to that, look, good for him. Ultimately, we don't want violent, angry, dangerous people living in this country. We want them to be rehabilitated. However, for those poor families, answering the question that you've just put to me, terrible. This is all being dragged up again. And it's not just the 3 women he killed, it's also the woman that he attempted to murder as well, who survived, and 2 other women that he also tried to, he did a number of things to. He wasn't convicted of those, actually, I should say, but there were serious allegations. And he did go to trial. So this is somebody who killed 3 people in 3 years, attempted to kill someone else in that 3-year period, and also went on trial for another 2 serious attacks in that 3-year period as well. A very, very dangerous person.
Look, Donna, thank you very much, as ever. It's always great to have you on the show. Much appreciated. Donna Jones, there, is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. Right, OK, well, that's just about it for today, ladies and gentlemen. But stay where you are, because Michelle Dewberry joins me in the studio. How are you?
I do join you in the studio with a big, massive crease across my forehead because I've just got off a motorbike.
OK.
I was desperate to make sure I was here on time, so that was the quickest...
You got a motorbike here?
Yeah, that was the quickest mode of transport. So if anyone can sit there and go, what's that big, massive crease on her head?
Were you driving the motorbike?
No, I was not. I was being driven.
What, so you, like an Uber for...
Something like that. Look at how confused he is. It's not a difficult
concept. I just thought you couldn't... Well, everyone's looking at me like I'm bonkers here.
Yeah,
I didn't realise you could just hire a motorbike.
Yeah, it's not a difficult concept. You just get on the back and off you go.
Wow.
Here I am.
So some motorbike driver out there pulled up and had Michelle Dewberry clinging to the back of him as he drove you into the studio.
Well, I wasn't clinging from a day of life, no.
No.
I was casually relaxed on the back thinking, yes, how excited am I to get to work today, because there's so much to talk about.
Go on then, what is there?
Well, I always say to you, Patrick, you've got to stay tuned. I've got 2 of my Friday favourites today, Alex Dean, Paul Embry. Lots to get into. Strikes, by the way, to me, it feels like there's an end to it.
I think so.
Does it to you?
It does.
Also, this ridiculousness of Levi Bellfield as well. I mean, come on now, pack it in. Of course he shouldn't be getting...
I'm not being funny, but what kind of woman as well would think, oh, this guy's a sound
I used to
life
go out
partner.
with a convict and I used to visit him in prison, but I have to say, it was not like a serial murderer or anything like that. I'll get into that story.
Am I allowed to be confused about that in a way that I wasn't about the motorbike thing?
Don't be confused about anything. It's all being explained on Jubes &Co in a minute.
One day you'll write a book and
I've written one. I can't even believe you've not read it. It's available in all good charity shops.
Oh, this is awkward.
Gosh.
This is awkward.
I know.
OK.
Oh, you know, I can't even believe this.
Oh, that book? Oh, that one? Yeah, no, yeah, oh, yeah, sorry, there you go. All right, well, I need to read it. Right, on this very awkward note, have a great weekend, everybody. Make sure you watch Jubes & Co. She's got a buck out, if you don't know. Anyway, right, thank you very much, everybody who's tuned in to me all week, apart from yesterday when I had the day off to go to the races, because that's the kind of guy I am. Make sure you stay tuned for Michelle with Jubes & Co. See you in a bit.